111. Alliance stopped drinking and tied the small silver gourd, but he still crossed his legs. The bamboo knife newly made by the lord of the land of Chiduan Mountain was placed on the knees of the bamboo hat man. Alliance gently patted the hilt and the top of the scabbard with both hands and said, "Actually, I have been testing you many times along the way. Your choice will determine where I will escort you. To put it simply, how far I can accompany you depends on how many obstacles you cross." Chen Pinggan nodded and said, "I also figured out a little later, but I just feel that you have a lot of ideas in your mind, Alliance. As for what exactly you are thinking, I have never figured it out." Alliance was not surprised by this and said frankly, "The first time was by the Dragon Whisker Creek. If you had made me feel that you were an ignorant kid and a good person who relied on hot-bloodedness to make decisions, I might have only left you a donkey and left. As for whether you can survive until the Wei and Jin dynasties of the Wind Snow Temple come out of closed-door training, it has nothing to do with me. Anyway, you will die sooner or later, and it will be a waste of my feelings." Alliance recalled the details and talked tirelessly. Chen Pinggan was stunned. He did not expect Alliance to be so meticulous, and he could not imagine that there had been so many strange tests in his life. The third last time was the Battle of Kadunshan Shiping. If I had not deliberately lured them, the Wei Pai of Chiduan Mountain and the two pythons would not have acted so rashly. I was hoping. The second last time was to lure you back to the bamboo forest and cut a few more bamboos. This time, if nothing unexpected happens, will be the last time. Originally, I wanted to escort you to Yefu Pass before leaving, but now there are some unexpected situations, so I have to leave in advance." Alliance smiled and said, "Some tests are deliberately done, and some tests are done with the help of the situation. During this period, some of the things you did made me very disapproving and pedantic, but some of the things you did made me feel very happy. This is right. This is not the imperial examination art of scholars like Qi Jingchun and Kui Dong, which focuses on authenticity. I did all these and then watched coldly from the sidelines. I watched your words and deeds, which is the same as some old immortals of sects who accept disciples as their last disciples. It's a way of thinking, not talent." Alliance laughed at himself and said, "Do you think that I, Alliance, have nothing better to do? Or that I have a lot of evil thoughts?" Chen Pinggan put his legs on the bench and sat cross-legged lazily. He rested his chin on his hands and asked, "Ah Liang, is it because I know Mr. Qi? Is that why you care so much about me?" Alliance stopped joking and said in a deep voice, "There are too many temptations on the path of cultivation. Li Huai's Great Water Cliff and Lin Shui's talent in cultivation can be sold for money and exchanged for Chen Ping'an's stepping stones. Qi Jingchuan's disciples shouldn't be so miserable. Especially Li Baoping. She's such a good girl. When I think of her being hurt by her trusted youngest uncle, I, Alliance, feel like my heart is about to break." Alliance, who had just been serious for a while, soon showed his foxtail again. He said with a smile, "Alas, we old men can bear the destruction of our country and the sinking of mountains and rivers, but we can't bear these small beauties." Chen Pinggan picked up a sugar-coated whore that had not been sat on by Alliance. He chewed slowly and asked vaguely, "Alliance, what do you think of me now? If you think I can't do it, why don't you ask your friends to send Baoping and the others to the Great Sui Kingdom? I'm not afraid of hardships. I'm not lying to you. I'm just afraid that Mr. Qi will be disappointed. I'm afraid that I can't protect Baoping and the others." Alliance laughed and scolded, "Don't even think about running away. You're really the most suitable person for this job. Qi Jingchun can't do anything else, but he has good taste. Unless it's the old man who takes them on a study tour. Let's not talk about the old man. He's a cowardly turtle and a stingy scholar. Just talking about him makes me angry." Alliance held his bamboo hat and looked up. He clicked his tongue and said, "Oh, this Emperor Dali is really interesting. He's really good. Since there's still some time, I'll talk to you about the most useless things. I'll also explain why I'm willing to spend so much time on you." Alliance also crossed his legs and sat cross-legged with Chen Pinggan. He placed his saber on his knees and said slowly, "Whether it's martial arts or Qi training, the biggest taboo on the path of cultivation is to follow your heart. It's a shortcut, but it's difficult to think about why. The military cultivators would never take a step back. Most of the martial artists in the world could not escape from such a rut. They only felt that to go against the current was to press forward courageously. What they were fighting for was to advance bravely and to reach the sky by themselves. Taoists like to ask themselves. Buddhists like to look at the past and the future. Confucians like to talk about rules and draw frames. Moism is a little strange. They like to help the world and are most chivalrous. They don't like to talk about longevity. Novelists have high standards but little ability. They hope to create a world on paper by themselves. The human heart is as brittle as glass. It can't stand up to scrutiny. Qi Jing-chun is a pedantic and conceited gentleman. If he doesn't want to test the waters, then I'll do it for him. How can the inheritance of literary lineages be trifled with? If you, Chen Pinggan, turn out to be an embroidered pillow or someone who can't withstand temptation, then what will you do? Qi Jing-chun might be dead, but I, Alliance, am still alive. If Qi Jing-chun doesn't see it, he won't be bothered by it. Won't I be disgusted to death? You have to know that being able to endure hardships and being able to withstand temptation are two completely different things. Alliance sighed and said, "This is probably the case of the eunuch being more anxious than the emperor." Chen Pinggan said in all seriousness, "Alliance, don't worry. Although I like money, I only like money that I earned with my own hands. If it's someone else's money, even if it falls on the ground, I'll only look for the owner. I'll never put it in my own pocket." Alliance smiled and said, "I can't say that you're wrong. But if you really need it urgently, you can use it first to solve your urgent needs. Just remember this debt in your heart. When you have the ability to repay it in the future, you can repay more. Both sides will be happy. This is a real good person. Otherwise, would you really starve yourself to death with that little money?" Chen Pinggan asked, "Then how do you know if I need it urgently?" Alliance pointed to his heart and then to his head. "If you pass these two hurdles, then you can use the money." Chen Pinggan's eyes lit up. He seemed to have understood something. He nodded vigorously and said, "Alliance, although you haven't been educated, you're someone who has been through a lot. Now that you've said it, I've thought it through." Alliance rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Why do I feel that it's worse than Li Huai's bootlicking?" Alliance leaned against the railing and looked at the clear moonlight outside the corridor. He sighed and said, "You know, your pedantry is actually called integrity in the words of scholars like Qi Jing-chun. That's right, it's true uprightness. True uprightness, true uprightness. Uprightness of a gentleman, uprightness of a straight path." Alliance laughed and pointed to the ignorant youth. "Ha ha, you know all these yourself. You're a bumpkin, a miser, and a miser. But you're just like the old man when he was young. In fact, when Qi Jing-chun was your age, his temper was very bad. On the contrary, he was recognized as a late bloomer. Just like you, he had a heavy mind and a good temper from a young age. He was like a clay bodhisattva, born to sit on the altar." Alliance's voice became lower and lower as he spoke, but suddenly it rose. "Of course, I, Alliance, am used to doing whatever I want. I don't like your style very much. Back then, it was because of this feeling that I rejected the request of a young man. Well, that guy was about the same age as you are now. I often think that if I took him with me to travel the Jianghu, would it be better than it is now? At that time, I finally said to that young man, 'Trust me, you'll be more successful if you study. Jianghu is such a big place, Alliance, alone is enough. But the sea of books is boundless. Why should I follow Alliance and eat his dust?'" The bamboo hat man grinned. "So on this trip to Dali, I want to chat with some people. I want to tell them that there are people who care about things that Qi Jing-chun doesn't care about." Alliance inexplicably stretched out his hand and casually flicked his finger. In the bookstore in the alley of Guanshui Street, the young master who called himself Li Jin of the Chongdun River flew out as if his forehead had been hit by a heavy hammer. Not only did he crash into the wall of books, but he also broke through the wall and fell into the shop next door. The shop assistant who was napping behind the counter was so scared that he kept quiet out of fear. Alliance muttered, "When immortals fight, just watch the show. Little Koi, do you really think you've seen all kinds of big rivers and big waves? I, Alliance, have seen more big rivers than Li Huai has eaten rice. Do you really think this is bragging? I, Alliance, don't know what bragging is in this life. He then grabbed the air beside him. On the far side of the courtyard wall, a pocket-sized spirit that looked like a blue swimming fish struggled desperately like a fish on a hook. Alliance's palm pulled back, and this blue netherfish was restrained in an area the size of his palm. What was even more amazing was that after cutting off the connection between it and its master's spirit, the spiritual creature that should have been on the verge of death was instead more energetic than before. It swam leisurely with its tail twisting. Alliance explained, later, I'll let Li Huai keep it in the book Great Water Cliff. Hey! Why do I feel that this little bastard has dog shit luck every day? Does Li Huai step on dog shit every day in the small town and never wipe the bottom of his shoes? In the distance, a tender voice sounded, Alliance, you're the one who steps on dog shit every day. Chen Pinggan looked at Alliance. The latter laughed in a low voice, it's okay. The three of them came here not long ago. They don't know about Zhu He and Zhu Lu. As for this father and daughters leaving without saying goodbye, you can just find an excuse to deal with it later. Alliance waved his hand and said, don't eavesdrop. Come, let's split the loot. Li Baoping, Li Huai, and Lin Shuyi came to the corridor one after another. Li Baoping sat on the right side of Chen Pinggan, and Li Huai sat on the left side of Chen Pinggan. In the end, he had the same experience as Alliance. He cursed and took off the candid hawse on his buttocks. He immediately beamed with joy and threw it into his mouth without saying anything. Lin Shuyi sat silently beside Alliance. Alliance turned around and handed a pile of yellow paper talisman to Lin Shuyi. Study it carefully. Don't waste it easily. Qi Jingchun said that the Fulu Street and the Peachleaf Alley in your town are very mysterious. There is still a great opportunity hidden there. Alliance patted the cold youth's shoulder. No matter what, you, Lin Shuyi, are now the first true cultivator among all of us. You have to cherish your future even more. Lin Shuyi nodded. He solemnly put away the stack of talisman and hid it together with the Cloud Gem book. Alliance turned his head to look at the thief-looking Li Huai. He unhappily said, where's that crappy book of yours? Take it out. Li Huai angrily scolded, what are you thinking about it for? Unless you give me 10 taels of silver first. Alliance snapped his fingers. The originally hidden nether fish appeared in front of the 4 people. Other than Chen Pinggan, the other 3 children all stared with their eyes wide open. Alliance said with a face full of disgust, take out that crappy book. Casually open a page and clamp the fish in it. As for how to raise it, figure it out yourself. I'm not going to wait on you. Li Huai jumped up and took out the book Great Water Cliff. After opening it, his footsteps were quick as he abruptly closed the book towards the green nether fish. A faint wailing sound could be faintly heard from the pages of the book. Alliance rubbed his forehead. The remaining donkey, who wants it? Li Huai immediately raised his hand. Me. Can I sell it for money? Or if I'm starving, can I kill it for stew? Alliance didn't want to speak. Li Huai suddenly lowered his voice. He timidly asked, Alliance, you're not going to die and you're telling us your last words, are you? Alliance rolled his eyes. F***ck off. Get as far away as you can. Li Huai sighed and sat back down beside Chen Pinggan. My mother, father, and sister are far away from here. But the child's last sentence was a little sad. So Alliance, don't go, okay? I won't scold you in the future. Alliance wanted to say something but stopped. He took off the silver-white wine gourd and threw it to Li Baoping. Catch it. This small gourd is one of the best blade-strengthening gourds in the world. Ordinary blade-strengthening gourds can't compare at all. Ah Liang stood up and stretched. Nothing has happened, so I'm relieved. He looked down at the green bamboo blade. He raised his head and asked with a smile, Little treasure bottle, can I borrow that narrow saber auspicious symbol from you? Li Huai had a flash of inspiration. Alliance. Are you going to fight? I'll help you. Alliance cast a suspicious and inquiring look. The child laughed dryly. I'll help you wave the flag and shout. Li Baoping ran like the wheels of a car. Soon, he came back and handed the narrow saber to Alliance with both hands. Alliance hung the famous saber named Auspicious Symbol. At some point, Chen Pinggan, Li Baoping, Li Huai, and Lin Shuyi stood side by side opposite the bamboo hat man. The bamboo hat man stretched out 2 fingers and pinched the edge of the bamboo hat. He laughed and said, "I used to tell you how strong I, Alliance, was and how high my swordsmanship was. You always didn't believe me. You even liked to think that I was bragging. You are really too young and ignorant. I was afraid of scaring you, so I deliberately picked some trivial things. For example, I told you that my sword was so fast that water couldn't get through." Alliance finally asked with a smile, "You don't believe me, right?" Alliance looked into the darkness and ordered, "Protect them." Someone nodded. Then, the man who was wearing a bamboo hat for the first time finally took off his bamboo hat for the first time and threw it away. However, before the bamboo hat fell to the ground, it turned into powder and disappeared. At the same time, with the man with the 2 sabers as the center. Within 1,000 miles, the earth cow turned over and shook. Alliance subconsciously went to support his bamboo hat. Only then did he realize that there was no bamboo hat left. He scratched his head, coughed, and said with a smile, "My name is Alliance, kind." 112. The old man with the lantern, the Dr. Zhong of the Bureau of Rights, chose the secluded streets and finally came to the city god pavilion of Red Candle Town. Before he stepped over the threshold, the old man's lantern passed through the door as if it had passed through a ripple. The ripple was used to separate yin and yang, and the well water did not interfere with the river water, but in the old man's big red lantern, there were streaks of fireflies flying around and hitting the wall. Someone had written 4 simple words on the lantern in the old man's hand with a red brush: "Soul has come here." In the city god pavilion, which was in charge of yin and yang affairs with the county government, an old man with a red face in a Confucian robe bowed to the visitor and said loudly, "City god of Red Candle Town greets Dr. Zhong." To the left and right of the Confucian-robed old man stood a civil official with a jade tablet in his hand. There was also a military general wearing armor and carrying a sword, with a raccoon squatting on his shoulder. All of them could be categorized as otherworldly items. The 3 of them had the exact same appearance as Lord Xing Wang's clay statue and the civil and military god statues worshipped in the martial saint temple of the literary pavilion. The old man with the lantern nodded in return and said with a serious face, "I believe you 3 have received the secret order from the imperial court. Within 1,000 miles, all the gods of mountains and rivers, the earth, Granny He, and the gods worshipped in the city god pavilion and the civil and military god temple are to intercept and kill a man named Alliance with a saber. In the 4 directions, if anyone dares to be afraid of the enemy or deliberately hide their strength, their golden bodies will be shattered. The water god's golden body will be buried at the foot of the mountain, and the mountain god's golden body will sink to the bottom of the river. You people from the 1 pavilion and 2 temples will also end up like that." The old man smiled and eased the atmosphere. "I'm not asking you to fight to your death, but to stop him with all your might. His Majesty is personally devising the strategy, so it's a good opportunity for you to make a contribution. Now that our Dali Iron Cavalry is heading south, it's unstoppable. Once we expand our territory, there will be many better and higher positions in the territory of the fallen country. What does this mean for you? You've been on the throne for a long time, so I'm sure you all understand the knowledge behind this." The 3 local gods spoke generously. "I won't do it half-heartedly. I will definitely do my best. I've already died in battle for Dali when I was alive. Now that I've enjoyed hundreds of years of incense, I'll naturally risk my life to make that bastard die here." The old man nodded his head in satisfaction. "Dali will definitely have to rely on all of you in the future to help guard the mountains and rivers. In short, we will work together as one and participate in this grand undertaking." In the Jade Liquid River Shrine, which was slightly closer to Red Candle Town, the burly man who had once appeared with the old lantern man on Guanshui Street was actually the director of the Martial Selection Department of the Ministry of War. It could be said that this burly man was in charge of the life and death of most of the Jianghu people in the Dali dynasty. However, compared to the old man's Bureau of Rights, the former was described as dealing with trash in a quagmire, while the latter was laughing and chatting with immortals about immortality. Inside the Jiangshan temple, there were 2 river gods with extraordinary auras standing there. One of them was holding a black iron spear, with golden inscriptions flashing from time to time. The other one had a green snake wrapped around his arm. The agile green snake opened its small mouth intermittently, spitting out snow-white breath. The 2 river gods were surrounded by misty water vapor. The burly man said in a deep voice, "Once the net is closed, the machete man will most likely escape to the south. So, I want you to meet here. At that time, I will be the first to stop him. I would like to kill a fellow Taoist but not me, but now His Majesty may be watching us. So, I dare not do it even if I have 10 guts. I hope you too won't let His Majesty down." After finishing his words, the burly man strode out of the Jiangshan temple and faced the Red Candle Town in the north. He simply took off his shirt, revealing his strong muscles and ferocious tattoos. An over-the-shoulder dragon tattoo that ordinary martial artists would never dare to tattoo, and a forest tiger was tattooed on his back. Under the moonlight, the burly man crossed his arms over his chest and stood still like a mountain. His aura was soaring. On the long street leading to the entrance of the Pillow Inn, the woman who tried to persuade Lin Shuyi to return to the Eternal Spring Palace with her did not go far. Instead, she chose a wine shop on the side of the street. There was a young and beautiful woman in charge of the shop selling wine and telling vulgar jokes to the customers. The woman's expression did not change. Her timid husband just buried himself in his work. Sitting next to the Grand Elder of the Eternal Spring Palace was the girl who rowed the gala-painted boat. She was a boatman's daughter who had been born in a lowly family for generations. But this time, she received a great fortune and was chosen by her master, who wanted to take her to the Eternal Spring Palace to cultivate the legendary magic. According to her master, who fell from the sky, the girl's talent was good. It was probably because she had lived by the river for generations and was entangled with the Chongdan River, so she was born with a natural affinity for water. She had a good aptitude and was expected to enter the middle 5 floors. The girl did not know what the middle 5 floors was. At this moment, she imitated her master and took a sip of the strong liquor. It was not because she was afraid of getting drunk, for there was no boatman's daughter who did not know how to drink, but because of her master's natural temperament, which made the girl involuntarily want to imitate her master. The girl asked softly, "Master, why is that youth unwilling to go to the Eternal Spring Palace with us?" The woman, whose real age was almost 60 years old, smiled faintly. "It can't be said that he doesn't know what's good for him. It can only be said that fate hasn't arrived. Of course, cultivation is cultivation of strength. It's like building a house. You need to strengthen the foundation, but the final height depends on the cultivation of the heart and how far you cultivate it. That Lin Shuyi has a firm heart and is a natural talent for cultivation. Even if he doesn't enter the Eternal Spring Palace, he can still go very far. So you have to work hard. Only then will you have the opportunity to not feel ashamed of your inferiority the next time you meet him." The girl grunted and lowered her head to drink the liquor. It had to be said that this woman, who seemed to be eternally young, had a rather good temperament. AP Pap 113. When Emperor Dali stepped onto the highest step and stepped onto the platform, his figure immediately disappeared. From where Song Jiangqiang and the 2 directorates of ceremony stood, the stone platform was originally the size of a farmer's sun-drying field. Looking up from afar, it should have been empty. However, the man in the ceremonial robe saw a towering building that was more than 10 feet high. It was not a wooden building that could be seen everywhere in Dali's capital, but it was carved out of countless white jade. On the ground floor hung a plaque with the words Bek O Keikyang Building written in gold. The door of the building slowly opened on its own. Emperor Dali walked in and saw a snow-white sword suspended in the air. The whole floor was filled with strands of wandering electric light. The emperor ignored the electric light that was pregnant with fierce sword intent and strode forward to the stairs. The electric light was like the court officials meeting the first assistant of the emperor. They all retreated to make way for him. It was a similar scene on the 2nd floor, with only a flying sword hovering in the center. However, it was different from the 1st floor, where the body of the flying sword was wide. The body of the flying sword here was sparkling and translucent, with a body as slender as a willow leaf in early spring. Inside the building, there was a stream of green water flowing slowly, rippling slightly. Emperor Dali continued to climb the stairs. At first glance, compared to the stunning scenery of the first 2 floors, the 3rd floor was no different. There was no amazing flying sword suspended in the air, nor was there a strange environment to raise the sword. However, the man in the ceremonial robe who did not stop before stopped for a moment on the 1st floor. He narrowed his eyes and looked around carefully. He whispered with a smile, "Found you." Then he walked to a wall not far away and leaned forward slightly. In his sight, a pocket-sized flying sword that looked like an embroidery needle appeared. However, such a small flying sword was equipped with a grey scabbard inscribed with the words Pillar of Strength. This inconspicuous little toy actually had a grand and exaggerated name. On the 4th floor, there was an ancient long sword covered with talisman script. On the 5th floor, there was an unimaginably large sword, as tall as the Dali man, with the word Jinyu written on it. Emperor Dali ascended the stairs one by one and finally stopped at the 10th floor. Inside the building stood one old man and 2 young ones. The old man's face was dark and his skin was wrinkled. He was tall and wore a white robe with a laurel on his head. In his deep eyes, there was a purple aura that was visible to the naked eye. Beside the old man was a young man and a young woman. They were the master and servant of Mud Bottle Alley, Song Jisin, and the maidservant Jikyu from Liju Grotto Heaven. The young man was already one of the most outstanding young men in Dali. The only fly in the ointment was the khaki-colored 4-legged snake lying on the young man's shoulder. It was a bit of an eyesore. Fortunately, if one looked closely, the snake's forehead bulged, revealing its loftiness. The young girl Jikyu seemed to have grown more than an inch taller than when she was in Mud Bottle Alley. Her face was even more beautiful. Her whole body radiated radiance, giving people a mysterious feeling of a cold rain after a long drought. At this time, the old man was standing at the window of the 10th floor. He stretched out his hand and pointed somewhere in the capital to teach the young man. Seeing the arrival of Emperor Dali, the old man just nodded to greet him. Emperor Dali did not care at all. He walked to Song Jisin's side and wanted to touch the young man's head. However, the young man quietly turned sideways and avoided the palm. Emperor Dali's face was as usual. After retracting his hand, he asked with a smile, "Song Mu, you have been learning Qi observation technique from Mr. Lu for some time. Have you found the formation eye of Dali's capital city mountain river formation?" The young man's face was cold. There was a sense of alienation in his stiff voice. "I haven't found it yet." The old man Laurel laughed. "How can it be so easy to reach the next level in the journey of geomancy? However, Song Mu is already outstanding. He is not inferior to the young talents of other continents. The key is that Song Mu has a lot of potential. Because he is proficient in calculation and deduction, he can learn everything with half the effort." The Luan Juzi upstairs still does not hesitate to praise Song Mu. He praised him as a coral lotus. Emperor Dali laughed. "He is my son." The maid Jikyu quietly took a few steps back. She wrinkled her nose and sniffed. Emperor Dali turned his head and scolded with a smile. "You little thief, you are really not polite." The young girl looked blank and innocent. The man pointed at her and joked. "It's not difficult to borrow again. Don't just take in and not take out. Be careful or I will send you back to that dragon lock well. Besides, the Changchun Palace, the immortal sect closest to the capital, has a well. When the time comes, I will let you move there." The man's joke made Jikyu's face turn pale. She quickly opened her mouth slightly and spat out a trace of golden breath. These faintly discernible breaths, like small golden snakes, quickly attached themselves to the dragon pattern on the man's robe. Like fish in water, they happily swam among the silk threads of the magnificent dragon robe. The dragon robe trembled slightly and emitted bursts of brilliance. The edge of the sea below the dragon robe really caused some splashes. Emperor Dali laughed. "You are so timid. Why did you dare to lose your temper with Mr. Qi again and again?" The young girl's face darkened. She moved to another window. She looked all the way south, away from the tall buildings, away from the palace, away from the capital. She tried to see her distant hometown in the south. She did not like this place. This was the capital of Dali, called Rising Dragon City. Emperor Dali stopped smiling and asked the old man, "Is Luan Juzi really confident that he can build the 13th floor of the Beko Keikyang building?" The old man in white with a floating immortal aura said in a deep voice, "If not, why would Luan Changye come to Dali?" The man nodded. He put his hands on the windowsill and looked at the prosperous capital. He said self-deprecatingly, "That's good. Although I'm recognized as a thrifty emperor and have been secretly mocked by so many monarchs and emperors in the Eastern Vase continent as a thrifty woman, there are some places where I'm willing to spend money." The old man smiled and said with emotion, "After hundreds of years of hard work, the Song clan's income from operating Liju Cave has been all spent on this Beko Keikyang building. If this is considered stingy, there won't be a second generous monarch in the Eastern Vase continent." Emperor Dali asked, "Although it's not easy, I still want to confirm with Mr. Lu one last time. As long as it's in the area north of the Lakeview Academy in the Eastern Vase continent, against a cultivator of the 10th floor who dares to go against Dali, this building only needs to use 10 swords. Cultivators of the 11th floor, 11 swords, 12 swords, 12 swords, can all fly out of the building and kill them instantly from thousands of miles away." The old man with the surname Lu said heroically, "It's just a small Eastern Vase continent, there's no accident." The old man added, "Judging from the situation and the summary of intelligence from various spies, the man with the bamboo hat who uses a saber must be a chi cultivator who went up to the 5th floor. It's more likely that he's on the 11th floor. It's also possible that he's on the 12th floor. In the end, it's still too far away and that person deliberately hides his aura. Whether it's my astrology deduction or the remote observation of the river and mountains on Palm, it's still a little vague." The old man waved his sleeves lightly and smiled, "But let's make it clear first. At present, the Beko Keikyang building has a total of 12 floors and each floor has one flying sword. Although it has a wide range of supernatural powers and infinite killing power, enough to deter the chi cultivators of the continent, every time the flying swords go out of the building, it's a huge consumption. Even if Dali has just annexed the rich Lu dynasty in the north, once all 12 swords are used in one go, it's still impossible to do it again within 20 years unless Your Majesty is willing to bear the cost of the destruction of all the flying swords." The man in the ceremonial robe nodded, understanding in his heart. Song Jisin suddenly asked, "At present, the Luan Juzi has yet to build the 13th floor of the Beko Keikyang building. If the uninvited guest who provoked Dali is a cultivator of the 13th realm, then what should we do?" The man in the ceremonial robe smiled and did not speak. The old man with the surname Lu laughed loudly and explained in a gentle voice, "A cultivator of the 13th realm? That's the largest continent in the world. Even in my hometown, it's still a rare existence. Moreover, the secrets of heaven cannot be revealed. Let's not talk about it. You only need to know that Ruan Jiao of the Wind Snow Temple on the 11th floor is already an important figure who can establish a sect. The word sect is a very weighty saying. Only with a cultivator of the upper 5 realms holding down the fort can it be called a certain sect. Otherwise, it would be considered as overstepping the etiquette system. Those old fellows of the Confucian school who are the most disciplined would be so angry that they would blow their beards and glare their eyes." Emperor Dali slowly said, "Although Ruan Jiao's temper is not very good, his actions are decisive, and he is slightly unreasonable. He has already attracted a lot of criticism from Dali's native immortals. However, this person's temperament is very much to my liking. Naturally, I am willing to treat him with respect. Not only will my Dali not refuse such a cultivator, I, as the monarch of Dali, am even willing to sit on equal footing with them. Moreover, as long as one sits on the dragon throne, they will understand the simple logic of buying horse bones with 1,000 taels of gold." Song Jisin still did not give up and stubbornly insisted, "What if it's a cultivator of the 13th realm?" Old Man Laurel smiled and shook his head. The top 2 realms of the upper 5 realms had long been lost. Therefore, the 13th realm was the biggest and highest legend in the world. It could not be seen in any of the ancient books and secret files of the secular dynasties. Even the immortals on the mountain with the word clan in the title of clan also kept it a secret. The old man surnamed Lu was born in the world's top 1,000-year-old aristocratic family. He was the son of a noble family in the continent. He was once a talented cultivator with high hopes. Therefore, through the fragmentary words of the elders, he could gather together and barely piece together some inside story. It should not be too far from the truth. The ascending realm of the upper 5 realms was already the peak of the world. It was like the 10th realm of pure martial arts. It was the real end. There was no path to follow in front of it. Moreover, once one entered this realm, he would be detected by the illusory heavenly way. He would be judged as a great thief who stole the foundation of heaven and earth. He must be eliminated as soon as possible. Heaven and earth did not tolerate him, and there was no place left for cultivators of this realm. Therefore, compared to the immortals and saints in the eyes of the world, the chi cultivators of this realm were more reclusive than those cultivators of the 10th realm. Otherwise, they would be forced to ascend. As for where they would ascend to, and how their body and soul would be placed, the old man surnamed Lu did not know. He only guessed that it might have something to do with the collapsed path of Shinto. Emperor Dali slightly lowered his head and looked at the young face that was still childish. He asked, "What if?" The young man nodded, "Yes." Emperor Dali retracted his gaze and smiled, "What if your crow's beak is right, then it doesn't matter." The young man did not hide his sneer. The young man did not take the words of the man in ceremonial robes seriously at all. Even if this man was the emperor of the vast Dali, the monarch of the largest dynasty in the north of the eastern bottle continent, and was regarded by many as an ambitious man who had the ambition to go south, the young man was now embarking on the path of cultivation. The 2 seniors beside him were the best chi cultivators in the world. He had also smoothly obtained the great opportunity of the Beko Keikyung building. Therefore, the young man was more aware of the huge deterrence a 13th realm chi cultivator had on a country or a sect. Emperor Dali's gaze was gentle as he still stared at the young man. He said softly, "The past emperors of the Dali dynasty relied on this what if to rise from a small vassal state of the Lu dynasty to where we are today. Not only did we annex the Lu dynasty, we will soon use the power of the entire country to attack the Great Sui Kingdom. The odds of success are very high. After that, without any worries, we will truly go south. Therefore, I have never been averse to the idea of what if. I even keep telling myself that the emperor who is truly qualified to be praised as a hero in the history books of future generations is able to crush those what-ifs beneficial to the enemy. At the very least, one must be able to withstand this what-if." The man looked calm. "Song Mu, this is the bearing of a hero, the monarch of a country." The man finally smiled. "Song Yuzhang should have taught you this earlier, but he didn't dare to." The young man's face was gloomy. The man ignored the young man's little knot and looked up at the sky, the Beko Keikyung building in the sky, with 12 floors and 5 cities. "I really want to know how majestic the real Beko Keikyung building in the sky is." The man bent his finger and gently tapped the young man's head. The young man couldn't avoid it and was a little angry. The man smiled happily, not caring that there were 2 outsiders present. He said bluntly, "Your mother thinks highly of your brother, but I think highly of you. Even a vicious tiger won't eat its cubs. A woman's heart is really the most vicious." The man was a little sad and said to himself, "Evil purple seizes the vermilion." The man then smiled, "That Mr. Chi, I'm sorry, and Dali is sorry to him. But you are his disciple, so that's good." The young man held back for a long time and finally squeezed out a digression. "As Emperor Dali, why don't you call yourself Emperor Dali?" The man gently put his hand on the young man's shoulder. "Dali has been regarded as a barbarian land for nearly 1,000 years. I hope to reflect on myself and not forget this great shame." The young man was stunned. The man retracted his hand and couldn't help but laugh. "I'm lying. I just think that saying Emperor Dali is inauspicious." The old man Laurel suddenly said, "It's here." The man asked, facing the encirclement, "You're not running away, but coming here to kill us?" The old man's heart trembled, and his eyes widened. He looked out of the window to the south and said in a trembling voice, "10th realm, 11th realm, 12th realm. It's already the peak of 12th realm." The man's expression was calm, and he said to the young man, "Song Mu, it's your turn." Song Jisin took a deep breath, turned around and stood still facing the south. He clenched his teeth and said, "I'm Song Mu. By Emperor Dallis' edict, the 12 righteous gods who guard the mountains and rivers are ordered to receive the sword." Dallis' capital was surging, and the sword energy in this tall building instantly soared into the sky. The first sword on the ground floor was the first to break through the air, and lightning suddenly appeared. In Dallis' capital, countless people looked up in horror at the lightning hanging above their heads. A moment later, it was the flying sword on the second floor. The third sword on the third floor. All the way until the 12th sword. Half of the flying swords did not go straight south to fight the enemy, but chose to detour in the other 3 directions. Moreover, when the flying swords left the tall building, they had already become incomparably huge, and after leaving the capital, they became even bigger. Even the small flying sword in the building, which was as small as a willow leaf, became a huge flying sword more than 100 feet long after it left Dallis' capital 100 miles away. With this 12-story tall building, which was a replica of the Beko Kekyung building in the sky, as the starting point, there were gods in all directions listening to the edict, revealing their majestic dharmakayas. Among them, at the southernmost peak of Dallis Nanyu, a golden body god stood on the peak of the mountain, raised his arm high, and shouted loudly, "Nanyu receives the sword." In all parts of Dallis territory, the other 11 gods of mountains and rivers revealed their huge dharmakayas, one after another, caught the flying swords that left the tall building, and then stepped into the air, crossing dozens of miles in one step. Without exception, the spearhead was aimed at the long rainbow that broke through the sky from the south to the north. The golden body of the Nanyu god took the lead to meet the enemy. There was a loud bang. The dharmakayas and the flying swords shattered together. In the capital, there was an exclamation from the top floor of the Beko Kekyung building, full of doubts and helplessness. Old Man Laurel murmured, "Impossible, impossible." On the 10th floor, Song Jisin's mouth seeped with blood. Dallis' son of heaven frowned. Only the maid Jikyu was lying on the windowsill, looking around mindlessly. The second golden bodygod was the same, and exploded with a bang. Every once in a while, there would be a thunderous sound that resounded throughout Dallis territory. The young man was already in a bleak state, bleeding from his 7 orifices. His face was ferocious, but he still forced himself to be firm, and his mind was not shaken. When the 6th thunderous sound came from afar, the old man on the top floor smiled bitterly. "I'm scared of you. I'll make way for you, okay?" The other 6 golden body dharmakayas that were originally lined up from the north to the south began to move to the left and right respectively, making way for the middle road. As if feeling that it was not enough, the white rainbow slightly stagnated, but it quickly dispelled the idea of finding trouble with those gods and continued to move forward. Finally, the figure crashed into Dallis capital and landed below the high platform where the Beko Kekyung building was hidden. Dallis vassal Song Jankyung's forehead was already sweating, but he still stood in front of the man who fell from the sky, blocking his path. Song Jankyung quickly showed a smile, and only felt that if he could have a good fight with this person, he would have no regrets even if he died, and his life would not be in vain. In the square, a plain-looking man stood there. The funny thing was that this person's calf was tied with a foot binding that was convenient for walking on the mountain road, and he was holding a broken green bamboo knife in his hand. The man turned his head to look at the capital city, and was a little puzzled. Then he turned his head to look at the vassal of the 10 realms of martial arts. He glanced at Song Jankyung and nodded slightly, showing a little approval. Finally, he raised his eyes and looked at the top of the high platform where the mystery was hidden. He threw away the bamboo knife and gently stamped his feet. The tall Beko Kekyung building was suddenly forced to reveal its true appearance. He pulled out another narrow knife from his waist, the auspicious symbol, raised his arm casually, pointed the tip of the knife at the tall building, and said loudly, "There are 5 inside, which one is Emperor Dali? I'm in a hurry, hurry up and come out to kowtow and admit your mistake. I'll count to 10, 10, 1. The man who jumped directly from 10 to 1 suddenly slashed down at the high platform and the tall building. 114. Alliance slashed down with his sword. Between him and the Beko Kekyung building, an extremely fine golden thread appeared, advancing rapidly like a tide. King Song Jankyung did not retreat, instead, he strode forward, and his momentum instantly rose to the peak of martial arts. With a roar, he crossed his arms in front of him. The square under his feet, after being heavily trampled by the second ultimate realm master of the Eastern Treasure Bottle continent, burst into a huge spider web. Honing one's martial arts in the midst of life and death was not an empty phrase. Song Changjing, as a prince of the Great Li dynasty, had resolutely joined the army. He had been in the army for more than 20 years, and had won and lost many battles, big and small, and fought to the death countless times. In the end, he was able to stand out from the martial artists of the entire Eastern Aquarius continent. Song Changjing's courage this time was probably one of the reasons. When the golden thread touched Song Jianqiang's arm, the sleeve of the white robe was instantly torn, like an iron thread cutting white tender tofu. It should be known that the robe worn by Song Jianqiang was the top Taoist magic weapon of the Dali immortals, called Flowing Water Robe. It was once a precious relic of a Taoist immortal of the upper 5 realms. It was said to be able to withstand all magical techniques below the upper 5 realms. But in front of the golden thread condensed from aura energy, it was so fragile. Although there was no external object to rely on, Song Jianqiang still insisted on not retreating. This man wanted to try whether his legendary martial arts physique, which was comparable to that of a golden arhat, could block this genuine immortal sword. The answer soon came to light. Yes, but only in the blink of an eye. Song Jianqiang still did not want to retreat. With a roar, his face glowed with a strange golden brilliance, and the qi in his body flowed. From the previous surging momentum, it turned into a scene where the water surface was instantly frozen. The slender figure of the Dali king retreated several feet. The skin and flesh of his arms had been cut, but there was no blood. At the same time, the unstoppable golden thread was about to be engraved into Song Jianqiang's bones. Get out of the way! A Taoist talisman general, which was several feet tall and wearing a green armor, knocked Song Jianqiang back a few steps and replaced him. The talisman general, which was engraved with countless Taoist golden characters and talisman cloud patterns, was surrounded by light. Its hands clenched the golden thread that was disproportionate to its majestic body. It retreated again and again. In the end, the body of the talisman general, which was carefully created by a Taoist sect, was cut into 2, but the golden thread, which was slightly dimmer, was still advancing toward the tall building. Baek Okkyang Building. After the Taoist talisman general was cut into 2, it collapsed. But behind it, an old man in simple hemp clothes appeared and stretched out a palm to block the golden thread. The old man had an aura of decay, but his face was still young, which gave people an extremely strange feeling. The old man smiled bitterly and asked in the language of other continents, "Alliance, can you stop now?" Alliance frowned and said, "Luan Changye? Weren't you exiled to the north because you failed to compete for the position of the giant?" The old man resisted the golden thread, and his palm was already bleeding. He said helplessly, "It's a long story." Alliance suddenly said, "I was wondering why there was someone in the Aquarius continent who could build such a clumsy small Baek Okkyang building. So it was you." Luan Changye hesitated and whispered, "I once asked Mr. Qi about the construction of this building." Alliance glanced at Song Jianqiang, who was ready to make a move. AP Pap. 115. Today's first chapter. There are 2 more chapters today. On the peak of Chiduan Mountain, the burly man with wine pots hanging around his waist was dying and lying in a pool of blood. When the rainbow light headed north from Red Candle Town, among the secret masters who participated in the hunt, the Dali Chi cultivator who was closest to it was the woman who was drinking in the tavern near the Pillow Rest. She was the Grand Elder of Changchun Palace. Unfortunately, she did not have the time to take action. Or rather, the thought disappeared as soon as it came to her mind. She did not have the time to take action, nor could she stop it. She did not dare to stop it. It was that simple. The woman's Taoist heart, which was as clear as glass, was covered with a layer of dust. She really became a drunk. The first person who stopped Alliance was the man who threatened the Lord of the Land and Wei Pai on Chiduan Mountain. He resolutely collided with the rainbow light, and then he was casually slapped back to the original place. Wei Pai sighed. He squatted down and pressed on the man's chest to protect his heart meridian, so that this poor man who was not afraid of death would not be shocked to death by his chaotic chi. Soon, an ordinary-looking young man appeared beside Wei Pai. He squatted down and fed his colleague and subordinate, who was covered in blood, a vermilion elixir. He grabbed the man's hot wrist and felt his pulse. His pulse finally stabilized. He gently exhaled a mouthful of turbid air, turned to Wei Pai and said, "Wei Pai, you saved old Liu's life. I appreciate this life-saving grace. I can't change how the Dali Imperial Court will deal with you after this. As for the matter of the deity position, it is even more inappropriate for me to plead for you. Once I do, it may only make Emperor Dali feel disgusted. No matter what, I personally owe you and Chiduan Mountain a favor." Wei Pai said expressionlessly, "It's just a matter of convenience." Wei Bian slowly stood up. Only then did he realize that although this young man with a restrained aura was a top swordsman who was regarded as the gatekeeper of the capital by the Li dynasty, he did not have a saber at his waist. Instead, he casually hung the long sword that he relied on for life behind his back. Wei Pai hesitated for a moment before asking, "You were in Red Candle Town, so why didn't you stop that Machete-Man alliance?" The young swordsman carefully carried the injured man on his back. After getting up, he smiled and said, "Swordsman? He is a swordsman, the most dashing swordsman in the world in my eyes. The reason why I chose the path of sword cultivation when I was young was because I admired him." Wei Pai, in fact, looking at the young swordsman who was about to leave with his subordinates, a rare smile of reminiscence suddenly appeared on his face. For no reason, he was in the mood to chat. He stood where he was and looked at the splendid lights in Red Candle Town. He said softly, "Well, compared to the continents I used to stay in, your Aquarius continent is a small place isolated from the rest of the world. It doesn't matter if there are some taboo interesting things to talk about. I might as well tell you something. You should know that there are 3 great academies in Confucianism. Back then, because of the matter of Mr. Qi Jing-chun, this person was indignant and broke into 2 academies alone with his sword. It was a chaotic fight. You should know that when Alliance traveled the Jianghu of various continents, he always followed his famous catchphrase, 'Is there anyone here who can fight?' I, Alliance, only beat the big and the old, not the weak and the small. But on those 2 occasions, Alliance did not show any mercy. Whoever tried to reason with him or block his way, he would break their longevity bridge on the spot without showing any mercy. Do you know that? How many lofty and insufferably arrogant noblemen and sages had been reduced to powerless mortal teachers because of this? It's just that these 2 tragedies were regarded as a taboo scale by the Confucianism, which values etiquette and rules the most, and no one dares to mention them casually." Wei Pai swallowed his saliva and asked in a trembling voice, "Senior Alliance is so domineering. Where is the real sage?" The swordsman looked proud and said with a smile, "That's why one of the 3 statues in the center of the Confucian temple was alerted in the end. That statue quietly descended from the sky and stood in front of Alliance. After that battle, Alliance stopped. No one knows who won or lost. Anyway, that great sage isolated a place, which was said to be a chessboard or a book, as the battlefield for the 2 of them to catch each other. Anyway, no one knows what happened. They only know that after that, Alliance left the academy, crossed 2 continents, and went to the Great Wall of Sword Chi in another world through the Inverted Mountain. The Inverted Mountain is an enclave that was built by the Taoist sage himself. It's also a forbidden place for Confucianism students. Therefore, a lot of shocking news was completely isolated. Wei Pai was in a trance, as if he was listening to a book from heaven. There was a saying in the Jianghu where martial artists ran rampant, "If you're not a cultivator, you don't know what's happening on the mountain." However, on the path of cultivation, there was a saying, "Those who live on the mountain know nothing about the outside world." Although the swordsman wanted to continue and had a lot of stories to tell, he decided to end it here. In the end, he said, "It's not good for me to get involved in your affairs. However, I'll let her and the Changchun Palace cultivate that girl, provided that you don't find it offensive, Wei Pai." Wei Pai smiled and said, "I'm not an idiot who doesn't know what's good for me. Thank you." The swordsman heaved a sigh of relief and looked at this troublesome god who was on the secret list of Dallas Ministry of Rites. He smiled and said, Then I'll go back to the town and tell her that when they return to the capital of Dali, they can choose to walk across the Chiduan mountain and then fly north. Wei Pai's expression was complicated. He sighed and lowered his head slightly. He said, I can't repay you. Then I can only thank you again. The swordsman from another continent asked in a low voice, I didn't believe the contents recorded in the Ministry of Rights files before. Now that I've seen it with my own eyes, I have to believe it. Wei Pai, because of her, you've delayed your immortal golden body for so many years. Now you're still not willing to let it go. Wei Pai shook his head and said, since I can afford it, there's no reason for me to let it go. The swordsman shook his head and said, I don't understand. Wei Pai remembered something and was a little embarrassed. He asked, it's an agreement with Senior Alliance. I plan to go to Luopa Mountain in Longquan County soon. This chapter is not finished, please turn the page. 116. Winking sad smiley. I really like the current atmosphere of book reviews and discussions. I'm not trying to be polite, but I hope that we can talk about our own reasons. Of course, it's okay to scold the author along the way. Also, the urging joke was really unintentional. You can tease me, but don't take it seriously. I'm very serious about this. I welcome everyone to urge me to update every day. Only with pressure comes motivation. Finally, someone suggested building a fierce building. I think it's very good. The group number is 22221655. Finally, there's one more chapter today. I'm a little regretful that I named it that way. Luan Juzi glanced at the old man Laurel who was sitting across Emperor Dali. The latter immediately stood up and began to cast the Lu family's yin-yang technique to cover the sky and earth, making it harder for others to observe from afar. Luan Juzi then said something shocking, this disaster is most likely caused by the others. At the very least, they're adding fuel to the fire. Maybe Alliance's appearance is so coincidental that someone secretly sent the news. Not long after Qi Jingchuan's death, Alliance came to Dali. There must be someone who doesn't want the Mohist branch behind Luan Changye and the Yin-Yang branch represented by the Lu family to help Dali conquer the entire eastern Aquarius continent. Emperor Dali loosened his fists and rubbed his cheeks. His expression was cold as he sneered, what a great struggle that hasn't happened in 1,000 years. What a chaotic world. Luan Juzi reminded him softly, now that things have come to this, you can't be discouraged. The man in the ceremonial robe laughed and shook his head, no, I won't. 10 years or 15 years is fine. There's a lot that can be done in that time. Thinking back to my Dali emperors, all the humiliation we suffered in the Aquarius continent, my internal injuries are nothing. The man forcefully swallowed a mouthful of blood that surged up to his throat. He lowered his head and rubbed his neck with his fingers, revealing a trace of ferociousness and regret. However, the ferocious look on his face did not disappear for a long time, and the regret quickly dissipated. In the end, all that was left was helplessness. It turned out that before the man ascended, he used a supreme secret technique to quietly break Emperor Dali's heart meridian, causing his longevity bridge to completely collapse. The originally hidden cultivator on the 10th floor who was full of vitality was now so weak that it made one's hair stand on end. Not only that, the Beko Keikyang building still existed, but half of the 12 flying swords were destroyed, and the other 6 were missing. To put it simply, the Beko Keikyang building, which had endless killing power, was now an empty shell, reduced to an embroidered pillow. It could be used to scare people, but to kill a cultivator of the 5 realms, it was a fool's dream. Song Jisin, who had lost his composure before, came in front of the 3 people. He had already regained his composure, but he still asked, Luan Juzi, Mr. Lu, can you tell me what happened? Why can't I sense any of the flying swords? On the 12th floor of the Beko Keikyang building, there were 12 flying swords. Incense, Pillar, Zhenyu, Shanhai, Daoji, Lei Xiao, Zidian, Sutra, Sanskrit, Hauran Qi, Hongzhuang, and Cloud Pattern. The 12 flying swords, which took half of the country's power to create, were all worthy of the Dali dynasty's national treasures. The 6 flying swords, including the incense, had been destroyed along with the golden bodies of the 6 Dali gods. But logically speaking, The other 6 gods of mountains and rivers who had made way for them did not participate in the fight against the enemy. Even if the flying swords did not return to the Beko Kekyang building in the capital, it was impossible for them to disappear without a trace. Like a kite with a broken string, they caused Prince Song Jisin, the master of the 12 swords, to lose his mind. Luan Juzi looked back at the lonely Beko Kekyang building, turned his head again, sighed heavily, and said, "The 6 flying swords have all been taken away by the guy on the path of ascension. Although they were not taken to heaven, he should have left them in some unknown place. We can't find them for the time being. Even if we can find them, it's hard to say if we can use them again." After all, Song Jisin was just a teenager. Overnight, he suddenly changed from an illegitimate child in the Mud Bottle Alley to a prince of one of the top dynasties in the Eastern Bottle continent. He came to the capital muddle-headedly and was brought here inexplicably. After suffering so much to obtain the acknowledgement of the 12 flying swords, he finally felt that he could hold his head high and speak with a straight back in front of that bastard man. Who would have thought that in the end, it was all for naught? Therefore, after hearing the bad news, the teenager burst into tears and bit his lips hard. There were still some bloodstains on his face that could not be wiped clean. Luan Juzi did not know how to persuade and comfort the teenager. In fact, this old man with a bumpy life also felt that it was a lifetime ago and could not believe it. The school of Moism, along with the Ranger branch, had always abided by the ancestral teachings of the first saint, supporting the weak and not being bullied by the strong. But when it came to Luan Zhangye, he had flipped through the official and unofficial histories of the various dynasties and dynasties. He had visited countless countries, seen and heard with his own eyes and heard with his own ears. In the end, he came to a conclusion that blindly supporting and patching up the weak was useless. In the 100 years of chaos, heroes fought for supremacy. The number of people who supported the weak against the strong dynasties was far more than the number of people who died when the strong dynasties unified the world. Therefore, Luan Zhangye needed to find a suitable dynasty, a suitable ruler, to fulfill his ambitions. In the end, he found Emperor Dali, Song Jung-chun, and he was not disappointed. Even though the encirclement of Alliance had caused Dali's powerful nation to suffer heavy losses, Luan Zhangye never felt that this matter was wrong. The fault lay in the fact that man proposes, but God disposes. Even Luan Zhangye had to admit that he was not as good as some of the big shots behind the scenes. However, he still wanted to gamble. He staked everything on one throw and bet on the unstoppable trend of the world. Emperor Dali opened his mouth and laughed. "You too, can you go and see if there are any mistakes in the Beko Kekyang building? If that guy has a backup plan, then I really want to kill myself. It just so happens that Song Mu and I can be alone for a while. But first, you two must promise not to eavesdrop. We father and son are going to talk about our own things, please understand." The 2 old men quickly got up. One smiled and said they would not, the other said they did not dare. Emperor Dali looked up at the stubborn young man, patted the steps beside him, and then quietly crushed the jade pendant hanging from his waist. He said in a deep voice, "Sit down and talk. From now on, I am your father, Song Jung-chun, and you are my son, Song Mu. I'll just call you Song Jisin. It's a good sign to pass on the torch and collect bits and pieces." Song Yuzhang's name is tacky, but he still put a lot of thought into it. The young man sat obediently beside the man. Emperor Dali first sighed. "I have to say, the Great Sui Kingdom's Jiao family is really lucky. Also, your crow's beak stinks too much." When the 2 of them were alone, the young man was a little uneasy. Even if he was not afraid of this man on the surface, Song Jisin could clearly feel the man's control over the Dali dynasty from the attitude of his uncle, Song Jangkyung, the servant Jikyu, and the 2 old men. The kind of magnanimity and sloppiness that only looked on the surface was actually filled with arrogance and self-confidence. It was a bit like the attitude of the swordsman named Alliance towards the Eastern Aquarius continent, towards the whole world. The man smiled and said, "The remaining 6 flying swords that left Luli City, since they did not return, they are all gone. Gone, gone, the sky will not fall." Song Jisin was infuriated. "Gone, gone. How can you say it so easily? Luan Juzi and Mr. Liu both told me that these 12 flying swords mean that Dali has a self-evident influence on the direction of the entire Aquarius continent. But the young man did not dare to continue. And Song Jisin quickly regained his senses. The creator of the Beko Keikyung building and the flying swords was not him, but the man beside him who had accepted his fate. The man looked at the roof of a big hall in the distance, where there were squatting beasts lined up, and he said softly, to the ruler of a country, "Do not be afraid of any big trouble. When there is trouble, as long as you can solve it, it means that you and the dynasty have become stronger. If you cannot solve it, it means that your ability to govern the country is not enough. In front of us, there is such a big threshold that caught us unprepared. Dali and I did not manage to cross it safely. It is a pity. But I do not regret it. What I said is true. I am not lying to you." Song Jisin could not understand it even if he was beaten to death, and asked, "Why?" The man's eyes were sharp. Without any of his previous helplessness and discouragement, he pointed to the roof of the big hall, "Because this proves that the Dali country policy that I made is right. The people in the mountains, regardless of whether they are good or evil, must be locked in a cage. Dali will not interfere with them in their pursuit of immortality, and is even happy to help them a little, happy to see them succeed. But a dynasty must have its bottom line. At the very least, it must make those people act within certain rules. They cannot do as they please. They cannot easily move mountains and rivers in a secular dynasty just because of their personal preferences. In a casual battle between immortals, the ones who suffer the most in the end are the unarmed commoners of the dynasty. It must make all the commoners in my Dalis territory be willing to worship immortals, not just because of fear. Even if it is a commoner living at the lowest level of society, if he innocently dies because of a battle between immortals, at that time, I, Dali, must have the confidence and ability to seek justice for that commoner who is as insignificant as an ant in the eyes of immortal." Song Jisin was shocked beyond words, his mouth wide open, and he could not say a word. The man stretched out 2 fingers, almost touching each other, and laughed. "Now, the justice that I, Dali, can seek is very small, only this much. But compared to the other dynasties of the Eastern Bottle continent, those dynasties and countries that are slaves to the mountain immortals, it is already a world of difference." The man casually flicked his wrist, and finally clenched his fist, and raised it high towards the roof, as if he was demonstrating to someone, "I sincerely hope that the justice that the Dali can seek in the future can be as big, or even bigger." Song Jisin was already somewhat numb. It was just that for the first time, the youth felt that the man beside him had become flesh and blood, and was no longer a rigid existence similar to the dragon robe on the dragon throne. The man in the ceremonial robe turned his head and asked, "Do you know what that alliance said that angered me the most?" Song Jisin mustered up his courage and asked, "Was it that person who asked you to kowtow and admit your mistake?" The man laughed out loud, and shook his head. "As the owner of Dallas land, I can die standing, but I will never live kneeling. If I can't even do that, why would Dali want to go down south, and swallow the entire Aquarius continent? If a man deceives himself, the heavens will deceive him, but if a man is strong, the heavens will bestow him. You better remember this. Even if those immortals keep on saying that our Aquarius continent is the smallest continent in the world, but do you really know how big a continent is? You can go and flip through any history book in the world. Who has become the owner of a continent?" Song Jisin's face was firm, and he nodded his head. "If a man is strong, the heavens will bestow him. I will remember this." The man said sadly, "What truly angered me was that he said that Dali does not have a single person who can fight. Not a single one. I sneakily walked step by step to reach the 10th level of Qi cultivator, and in this eastern Aquarius continent, it is already considered very impressive. Your uncle, Song Jankyung, is even more exaggerated as a 10th level martial man, but what happened? In other people's eyes, he still belongs to the category of cannot fight. But fortune and misfortune come hand in hand, and that is the reason why I am able to live. One of the reasons. If I was at the 12th level today, and let that guy feel that he has the strength to fight, I am afraid he would have killed me in one slash." The man laughed out loud for no reason, but it gave off a feeling of a hero past his prime. Song Jisin touched the pot that did not boil. "One slash?" The man nodded his head. "I can be sure, it is a matter of one slash. That guy is a 13th level peak sword cultivator, a sword cultivator. That is why he is so unreasonable. Song Jisin's face was conflicted. He opened his mouth a few times, but swallowed it back, as though there was a question that was scratching his heart, but it was not convenient for him to say it out. The man leaned back, his elbows on the ground, and looked at the sky in this posture leisurely. Do you want to ask why he did not kill us, and then ascend to that other place where the world does not know where? Song Jisin used the back of his hand to rub his cheeks hard, and grunted in agreement. The man said frankly, "Before I tell you the answer, let me tell you a piece of unfortunate news. Rumor has it that after breaking through the 13th level, the important people can come down again and return to our world. Although the number of times is extremely few, there is still a precedent. The 100 schools of thought, the 1,000-year-old aristocratic families, for some reason, have deliberately chosen to keep it a secret." Song Jisin was quick-witted, his face aghast. The man sighed. That is why the path that our Dali has chosen is still very long. There is still a long way to go. Don't be discouraged. The man finally pointed to a certain place in the palace, and laughed. There is a young man who was taught by his mother. In his early years, he was unwilling to go to the Cliff Academy to study. As for me, I was too lazy to care. This little fellow, his temperament is very interesting. If there is a dog on the side of the road that pretends to bite, regardless of whether he is injured in the end, the young man will definitely kill that dog and stew it. Who knows, he might even find that dog's 7 aunts and 8 aunts and kill them all. Then, what about you? Song Jisin? Song Jisin said without hesitation, that is also the case. The man nodded. I was also like this when I was young. After sitting on the dragon throne, my temperament changed a little. Because suddenly one day, I felt a little bored. The man turned his head and laughed, but it is a good thing to have such a temperament and personality when you are young. You are eager to forge ahead and show off your ability. If people respect me, I will respect them tenfold. If people bully me once, I will bully them forever. A real man should be like this. Song Jisin said softly, I thought you would feel very disappointed. The man patted him on the shoulder. I'm not disappointed. If you're so young and haven't learned any real skills, but you've already learned how to read my body language and take out the things that the court officials used to figure out the emperor's heart and call it the art of dragon slaying, then I'll be really disappointed. Song Jisin leaned forward, his hands on his knees, and his chin on the back of his hands, but I know someone who might make a different choice. The man sat up straight and reached out to press the young man's head. Trust my eyes. That fellow can hold a grudge against anyone. It is just that he has suffered too much since he was young, and knows how to endure at such a young age. If this kind of person becomes an enemy, then it will be a real disaster. That is why I chose to turn a blind eye to the assassination at the Greenwave Pavilion. But you can rest assured that he has never treated you as an enemy. Especially after you followed your heart and did those 2 seemingly boring little things, he won't do it again. Song Jisin's face flushed red. The man in the ceremonial robe said again, but when you become the emperor of Dali one day, it will be hard to say. While that person has just ascended and will definitely not return to the human world for the time being, we should eliminate the root of the problem and eliminate this if as soon as possible. After this thought came to Song Jisin, he was a little annoyed as soon as he said it. He denied himself and muttered, no, if that person comes back in the future, Dali will really be destroyed. The man was happy and said with relief, do you think this problem is unsolvable? It's okay, that's because Song Jisin's position is not high enough. Song Jisin was a little discouraged. He could only silently comfort himself in his heart that it was a gift from the heavens to be strong. The man smiled. In this life, it is interesting to have 1 or 2 people who are both enemies and friends. I have had one since I was young, so do you. After a moment of silence, Song Jisin said doubtfully, you haven't said the answer yet. Take your time to think about it. I'm not so good-tempered that I like to expose my own scars after being beaten half to death. By the way, becoming the owner of the Beko Keikyung building will only bring benefits and no harm. I lied to your mother about this matter. I believe that after you lost control of the flying sword, you will know that I didn't lie to you. As for the meaning of this, you should think about it carefully. It's always good to think more about everything. The man who revealed the heavenly secret had just lifted his butt and was about to get up and leave when he suddenly sat back down. He picked up the youth's palm and said with a smile, "Come, let me read your palm. I know some superficial knowledge, but I didn't have the chance to use it before. Today, I'll use you to try it out." The youth handed it over in a daze. The man observed the lines on the youth's palm and said casually, "In 10 or 15 years, you can still be close to your uncle Song Jankyung, but you must not rely on him. As for recruiting, it was better to forget about getting this martial arts genius to be convinced by a junior like him. This younger brother of mine doesn't even bother to hide his ambitions. Even I, the older brother who suppressed him since he was young, never dared to show the slightest attitude of taming a beast. No matter who you resent, before you truly grow up, you can think about revenge in your heart, but you must not act rashly. But don't hold a grudge against your uncle because of my words. He is indeed a true hero. Otherwise, he wouldn't have said the true words, 'How can I, Dali, be the only hero in the world?' So in the future, as long as you have something stronger than him, he may acknowledge you." After a moment, Emperor Dali got up and left with a smile. The youth clenched his fists and continued to lie on his knees. The man said some polite words that he didn't understand, but during this time, the man quietly wrote 4 words on the youth's palm. Longevity. 3. Be careful. Song Jisin suddenly raised his head and shouted at the back of the man who was striding away, "Father." The man turned around and looked at the youth with a smile. His expression was not like that of an emperor looking at the youth. And this man's real ambition was to talk to all the immortals in the world about the rules at the foot of the mountain. His life's work seemed to have all gone down the drain, and it was silent. Song Jisin stood up. His eyes were moist, and his lips were bleeding from biting. The youth was about to speak. The man had already turned around. His voice was warm and mellow, and he left 2 irrelevant words: "A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. In the future, you must eat 3 meals on time." A travel-worn old scholar finally arrived at the foot of the Chiduan mountain. He adjusted the luggage behind him and held his waist as he lamented, "My old waist and old bones are suffering. What a pain, what a pain." 117. Luan Juzi and Old Man Laurel walked back to the Beko Keikyung building and went straight up to the 12th floor. There were 2 straw cushions on the ground. These were ordinary items that even the commoners could afford. They were not treasures that could help Qi refinement warriors to meditate and concentrate. After the 2 of them sat opposite each other, Old Man Lu smiled and asked, "When did you consult Qi Jing-chun about the construction of the Beko Keikyung building?" Luan Juzi smiled and shook his head. "Never. If I didn't say that, who knows if that eccentric alliance would kill all of us without a second word." Old Man Laurel was stunned on the spot. He asked doubtfully, "Surely he wouldn't do that?" Luan Juzi laughed heartily. "Of course I'm joking. Alliance is not such a person. But I didn't lie to him. Alliance, Qi Jingchuan's hard work was indeed left behind in the Dali dynasty. Moreover, he had high hopes for the future of Dali and the Aquarius continent. I believe that Alliance himself is clear about this. Otherwise, Qi Jingchun would not have built the Cliff Academy here. Even though he was in Dali, he taught all the scholars in the Aquarius continent. Most of the scholars who graduated from the Cliff Academy have died of old age. There are some who are still alive. All of these scholars are the ones who are carrying Qi Jingchuan's hopes for the next generation of scholars." Luan Juzi paused for a moment and asked, "Do you really think that these scholars have no resentment towards Qi Jingchuan's death?" Old Man Laurel was silent. Finally, he said slowly, "In that situation, Dali could only choose the lesser of 2 evils." Luan Juzi chuckled. He did not say much about this matter and immediately changed the topic. "In my opinion, the root cause of today's crisis is not Dali. Because he wanted to use the opportunity to establish his power, he launched that encirclement and suppression against him. With Alliance's cultivation base and his temperament when he roamed the various continents, he would not care about such a small matter. I don't know what Alliance thinks." Old Man Laurel sighed. "But let me say what you didn't say just now. At the end of the day, the knot in that person's heart is still Qi Jingchun. It is because Dali did not choose to stand up for Qi Jingchun when he was under pressure from all sides. Moreover, after Qi Jingchun left, the Cliff Academy was abolished. The tea cools too quickly after he left, and there are suspicions that he is looting a burning house. But you and I know very well that in the case of Emperor Dali, this is the truly wise move. If it were any other emperor or monarch, I reckon that he would not even feel guilty. He would only feel that this is not the right thing to do. Speaking of which, if we put ourselves in Alliance's shoes, don't we look like a Qi refinement warrior of the lower 5 realms flaunting his prowess and wanting to fight the two of us to the death? Moreover, this little guy has a well-thought-out plan and victory is in his hands. Old Man Laurel raised his hand and lifted his sleeves. He changed his sitting posture slightly and said with a bitter smile, "Why do I feel that I am a little funny when you put it that way?" Luan Juzi laughed and said, "If one day, there can be people like us, people with a little status, talking about something that the two of us have done in the past, and being able to marvel at it and be willing to cheer for it, that will be great." Old Man Laurel sighed and said, "Previously, if the 13th floor of the Beko Kekyang building was successfully built, there might still be some hope. Now, it is difficult." Luan Juzi sighed and said, "I wonder who among Dali's batch of children will have the most unexpected achievements in the future." Old Man Laurel smiled and said, "I bet on Song Mu." "What about you?" Luan Juzi smiled and said half-jokingly, "I bet on the little girl Wang Zhu." "What do you think?" The old man from the Yin-Yang school of Lu clan shook his head and said with a smile, "One branch can outshine others, but it is difficult to form a forest." Luan Juzi also shook his head and did not comment. He remembered something and asked, "Didn't Qi Jingchun accept some students and disciples in the Pearl Grotto Heaven? For example, that Zhao Yaro? Other than that, it seems that the militarists and Taoists of the Aquarius continent also fought over a child with the surname Ma." Old Man Laurel said indifferently, "Let's wait and see. I only hope that the two of us old men can live until the end of the chaotic world." The servant girl Ji Qiu stayed on the 10th floor of the Beko Kekyang building and did not go out. When no one was paying attention, she climbed up to the windowsill and curled up her body. She leaned against the window and turned her head to look at the south. She looked at the sky and then looked at the south. She did this repeatedly and did not get tired of it. You just like to reason with ants. Even when it comes to me, you like to talk about your principles. You live more tediously than anyone else and die more miserably than anyone else. This guy who seems to be very familiar with you is very different from you. He does not even put any of us in his eyes and is very carefree. But why do I still feel that you are better? But I feel that even if you are better, as long as you know what you are doing, as for how you conduct yourself, you should be like this weird guy." The young girl finally squinted her golden eyes and laughed, "Eh, I don't seem to be human." She was in a daze. After a long time, the young girl extended a finger and wiped her cheeks below her eyes. On the top of the capital, the two former allies were at daggers drawn. The woman in the palace dress said sharply, "Kui Dong, you knew that person from the beginning, right? So in order to curry favor with him, you deliberately opened the capital's gate and let him kill all the way to the Beko Kekyang building? This is a capital offense. Dying once is not enough. Do you think that if I was beaten into the dust, you would be any better? Is there something wrong with your brain?" Kui Dong, who appeared in the image of a green-robed scholar, said indifferently, "If I did not remove the capital's formation, do you believe that other than me, there would definitely be people dying in front of the Beko Kekyang building? Unlike now, at least no one died." Kui Dong sneered, "I know that Song Jisin's existence is now meaningless. He has lost his value. In any case, your other son, who is also my good student, is no longer needed to be the head of the Beko Kekyang building, which is very likely to be destroyed by the sword. So I guess you can't wait for this kid to die and be reincarnated." The woman smiled sweetly and said with a calm expression, "How can Imperial Tutor lie through his teeth?" Kui Dong did not linger on this topic and said, "The famous talisman in the capital, which no one can pull out, was originally proposed by Mr. Lu to be the flying sword on the 13th floor of the Beko Kekyang building. First, Luan Juzi felt that it was inappropriate. As the last sword on the 13th floor, it was not powerful enough. Second, in Longquan County, the predecessor of the Dragon Cave, it needed to consume 2 magical weapons as the price to split open the huge dragon beheading platform. The royal treasury was really stretched. Coincidentally, the talisman was known as the toughest. If it was lucky, it could withstand 3 attacks from a sword immortal. The woman frowned and said, "Kui Dong, what on earth are you trying to say?" Kui Dong said, unexpectedly, the dragon beheading platform was too big. After 2 attacks, the sword body cracked like the ice cracks on the porcelain of the dragon kill in a small town. The sword spirit inside was broken and there was no way to restore it. His Majesty felt sorry for it, but he did not blame anyone. Later, he seemed to have a sudden idea and simply gave it to a woman named Yang Hua, who was the maid beside you. However, at the same time, he ordered that woman to become the Jiang god of the Tiefu River. Thus, Your Highness lost one of your left and right arms, right? The woman in the court dress smiled and said, "Are you trying to say that His Majesty is reminding me?" Kui Dong said sarcastically, "You have always been beautiful on the outside and smart on the inside." The woman in the court dress sneered. Kui Dong clicked his tongue and said, "Why don't you think about the fate of the 5 mountain gods?" Her originally fair and tender face turned pale in an instant. The woman fell into deep thought, like a chess player starting to review the game. Kui Dong did not disturb her thoughts. Emperor Dali originally wanted to use the falling of the Liju cave to promote the cloud-pinning mountain, which was full of fate, to the north mountain of the Dali dynasty. However, this created a very awkward and delicate situation. Now, the 5 mountains of Dali were all located to the north of the cloud-pinning mountain. Although at that time, none of the mountain gods objected, the position of these mountain gods was like the mountainside between the Dali immortals and Jianghu. It was like the majestic pass at the waist of the country. Overnight, the situation became turbulent. Many sects disguised themselves as good men and women, ordinary pilgrims, scholars, and poets, visited the 5 mountain gods. They did not talk about the incense, but only talked about romance. The mountain gods around the 5 mountain gods fell into silence. In the end, for some reason, Emperor Dali, the man who was extremely arbitrary in some important matters, suddenly changed his mind and withdrew this important decision that was related to the throne and fate of the country. However, a very coincidental thing happened. A foreigner who dared to kill 2 Grandmaster men of sacrifice appeared in Dali. Given Emperor Dali's iron-fisted character, he had this huge hunting encirclement because it involved the situation of Dali going south. It would determine how many Dali soldiers would die in the future journey south. Otherwise, given the Dali dynasty's inherent barbaric image in the entire eastern Vars continent, the rolling torrent of Dali's iron cavalry was destined to appear. Those arrogant mountain gods, for various reasons, would definitely come to test the speed of Dali's saber, the strength of Dali's iron cavalry, and whether they were qualified to be on equal footing with those in the mountain gods. Of course, Dali had its own celestial forces, and many of them were affiliated with the Song dynasty on the surface, and even more so in the dark. However, this still could not stop those cultivators who were like moths to a flame. What they were most afraid of were those Qi refinement warriors who had thick skin and whose whereabouts were unpredictable. They would purposely choose the ordinary soldiers of the Li dynasty and kill them indiscriminately. Most importantly, they would run away decisively after killing them. What should the imperial court of the Li dynasty do? Thus, the sword tower of Beko Keikyung building came into being and began to surface little by little. The first to know this big secret were the 12 gods of mountains and rivers, who were on the same side outside the capital of Dali. Previously, when the Song clan wanted to take Cloud-Splitting Mountain as the North Peak and remove the titles of the original 5 peaks, even though Emperor Dali had secretly hinted to the 5 gods and made a different explicit promise, it was still suspicious that he was kicking them to the curb after they had outlived their usefulness. The silence of the 5 gods was barely reasonable. After all, when it came to the golden body of incense and the foundation of the Great Way, who would dare to easily believe in words and paper? Then, the matter of resisting and killing the enemy became a righteous matter. The 12 gods, who had shared the glory and disgrace of the Dali dynasty, had no reason to shirk away. All of this, before the real fight with the foreign swordsman. Actually, there was no fault to be found. Perhaps even the 6 Dharma forms, whose vitality had been greatly damaged, did not feel that there was any problem at all with their real bodies left in the mountains and rivers. This was because in the secret order that Emperor Dali gave them, it was clearly stated that they were to kill a 10th or possibly 11th level cultivator. That was all. Even after the fight, it was still the same. The final outcome was obvious and extremely dismal. The Dali dynasty, from His Majesty himself to the builder of the White Jade Building, and the 6 gods of mountains and rivers, seemed to have all lost. But all of this was because no one, including Emperor Dali, expected that the enemy would be so powerful. In the end, when the truth was revealed to the world, it even gave people an invisible illusion that Dali was honorably defeated. But at this time, Kui Dong, who was standing on the city wall, still had some lingering fears. Because in the loss, the great Li Emperor had achieved a part of what he wanted to achieve. Among the 5 gods of the mountains, only the god of the Middle Mountain, who had always been loyal to the Song clan, and the god of the North Mountain, who was in the most difficult situation before, had their Dharma forms intact. The other 3 were completely wiped out and their cultivation levels had plummeted. They were almost reduced to ordinary gods of the mountains, struggling at death's door. They had lost the courage and confidence to wrestle with Emperor Dali in the matter of changing the name of the mountains. The truly terrifying subtlety was not this. In the early years, when Kui Dong and Emperor Dali were chatting happily in the process of playing chess, Dali's imperial tutor, who had always been unscrupulous in his speech, shared some of his insights. Among them, he said that sometimes, it was better to use those who had made mistakes and been beaten. They could even be put in an important position, because those who had suffered pain and had been taught a lesson would be particularly obedient. Therefore, among the 5 mountains, except for the god of the Middle Mountain, as long as the other 4 mountains in the east, south, west, and north chewed on the aftertaste of this tragedy one day, then most of them would begin to resent Emperor Dali. Only the god of the North Mountain, who was the first to take the wrong side, would only be more afraid. If it were before today, Kui Dong would have been willing to tell her these details one by one. But at this time, he did not intend to suffer with her. Kui Dong could tolerate some of the dirty things this woman had done. After all, it had nothing to do with him. The more ruthless an ally was, the more his enemy would suffer. Kui Dong was not foolish enough to persuade this ally to have a bodhisattva's heart. For Kui Shi to be able to get to where he was today, he definitely didn't rely on benevolence. But His Majesty, if this siege was successful, perhaps just wanted to knock some sense into him. But now, the situation was very different. This empress, who really did not have the slightest bit of womanly kindness, let the surrendered general of the Lu family cut off Song Yuzhang's head and secretly put it in a wooden box, in case of an emergency. Who was she targeting? Naturally, it was her son Song Mu, or Song Jisin, who had grown up in Mud Bottle Alley. Of course Song Yuzhang deserved to die. The construction of the covered bridge involved a great scandal of the Song imperial clan. The saying of making amends for one's faults did not make sense here. After Song Yuzhang returned to the capital, he served as an official of the Ministry of Rites for a period of time. Before he could even warm up his seat, he was personally appointed by the emperor to Lizhu Paradise. Nominally, he was more familiar with the local customs and affairs, which would be beneficial for the matter of conferring the title of God of Mountains and Rivers. In reality, Song Yuzhang was well aware that this was giving him a relatively dignified death. It was not a sudden death in the capital's official residence, and he was not casually beheaded for some crime. Song Yuzhang still faced death calmly. Even as the imperial tutor of Dali, Kui Dong, even though he felt that Song Yuzhang was completely blindly loyal, he could not deny that he somewhat admired this bookworm's honest character. Kui Dong privately believed that in the court of a dynasty, there were always 2 things that were required: the inconspicuous floor tiles and the pillars that supported the palace. Neither could be missing. Song Yuzhang belonged to the former. He, the imperial tutor, Kui Dong, the vassal king, Song Jianqiang, and the other officials of the 6 departments all belonged to the latter. However, this woman actually collected that head, crossing the emperor's bottom line for the first time. As a result, that trusted general called Yang Hua was forced to become the god of the Tiefu River. In reality, although that palace maid was indeed talented, under normal circumstances, She definitely would not have been promoted so hastily. With Emperor Dallis' shrewdness and diligence, he would definitely have made better use of her potential. However, this empress still bit the bullet and did her best to make Song Jisin, the owner of the Baekho Kaekyung building, obtain the recognition of the 12 flying swords, and walk up floor by floor. It seemed like a mother making up for her long-lost son. In reality, it was not so simple. Song He was the one she truly regarded as her own flesh and blood, and she had high hopes for him. After all, one of them lived with him day and night and watched him grow up bit by bit. He made her happy in every aspect. On the other hand, he was far away in the Black Pearl Cave, struggling in the shabby alleys full of chicken dung and dog excrement. She had tried to peek at the Emperor's secret file once in the earliest days, but she was severely punished. It was probably from then on that she had given up on her eldest son. In addition, Song Mu's name was clearly written in the official residence of the Dali sect. His name was crossed out in red ink, which was a shocking sight. As for whether there was suffering and pain in the depths of her heart, Kui Dong did not know. No one knew. Kui Dong was not interested in the bloody details and mental journey unknown to others, and why and how she treated her eldest son, Song Mu, as a stepping stone for her younger brother, Song He. The woman in the court dress smiled and said, "I already know where I was wrong, but does Kui Dong know?" Kui Dong put one hand behind his back and patted the wall of the arrow pile with the other hand, and said slowly, "I know. I opened the capital city's great formation and opened the door to meet the enemy. Although my intention was good, and I could let Alliance see our Dallas' sincerity and compromise, I was still caught in a dilemma." The woman looked at the imperial tutor with pitiful eyes, and gloated, "His Majesty's life is also a person who supports the dragon. How can you put it on the gambling table without permission?" Kui Dong nodded and said, "That's true." The woman said with good intentions, "The great imperial tutor of Dali, once the first disciple of the sage of literature, at this time, if you shed tears of regret, maybe His Majesty will spare you." Kui Dong smiled and said, "I'm a pitiful person who has fallen many times. I can bear pain and endure loneliness. But you're different, Your Highness. You were born in a rich family, and you've been used to a life of luxury since you were young. I'm afraid it'll be a little difficult." The woman's face was gloomy, and she finally shed all pretense of cordiality. She asked bluntly, "Are we going to break up?" Kui Dong said calmly, "The friendship of a lowly person is as sweet as wine. We make friends with benefits, and we break up when the benefits are exhausted. What's so strange about that?" "What, Your Highness, don't tell me you think we're gentlemen's friends." The woman gritted her teeth and said, "Fine, fine, fine. You win. Then you'll have to beg His Majesty to beat me to death, or else." Kui Dong waved his hand and said, "Don't scare me with words. You know very well what kind of personality I, Kui Dong, have. The mountains are high, and the rivers are long. No one knows what will happen in the future. As long as Your Highness can get through this, Kui Dong will naturally be willing to ally with you. If you can't, rest assured, Your Highness, that I won't hit you when you're down. I understand His Majesty's thoughts a little, and I will never do anything that harms others without benefiting myself." The woman in palace attire said something that was rare for her to be sincere. "Kui Dong, you're a very scary person." Kui Dong smiled and didn't say anything. He just couldn't help but think of that familiar figure. Kui Dong, who had once studied under that old man when he was still a teenager, would often see that sword-wielding wanderer come to the old man's side. One would talk about sage principles, and the other would talk about interesting things in the Jianghu. The two of them were like chickens and ducks talking about ducks. Many years later, Kui Dong stubbornly insisted on doing things his own way. He didn't recognize that teacher who had taught him and betrayed him. Later on, he committed a series of crimes that involved deceiving his master and destroying his ancestors. Kui Dong never regretted it. Everything was for the sake of the great Tao. However, losing that person's friendship also made Kui Dong, who had such a cold heart, feel regretful, so regretful that he somewhat regretted it. However, if Kui Dong was given a chance to choose again, it would still be the same. There wouldn't be any changes. On the great Tao, after taking the first step, there was often no way back. At this time, on top of the city wall, Before Kuidong's words landed, a golden-feathered eagle broke through the air and arrived. It suddenly stopped on top of the arrow pile. Kuidong took a step back and lowered his head slightly. The woman in palace attire hurriedly turned sideways and curtsied gracefully. It stared fixedly at the woman. A crisp and tender child's voice sounded. Song Jung-chun said that you should go to Eternal Spring Palace to cultivate. When you reach the upper 5 realms, you can leave Eternal Spring Palace and return to the capital. However, during this period, you are not allowed to interact with anyone. At the same time, you will immediately hand over all the files on Bamboo Leaf Pavilion to Imperial Tutor Kui. You only need to cultivate in peace. Kuidong bowed and said, "Thank you, Your Majesty, for your kindness." It turned its head and looked at the Dali Imperial Tutor. Song Jung-chun said that you should not do it again. Back then, he told you not to do it more than 3 times. He wants you to cherish it. Kuidong nodded and didn't say anything else. The woman in palace attire only asked one question. "Can you let Mu-er and he-er visit me at Eternal Spring Palace from time to time?" It nodded and said, "Of course." Song Jung-chun also said that Song Mu will stay in the heart-nourishing room to continue studying. If you feel lonely on the mountain, you can bring Song Mu to Eternal Spring Palace to cultivate the thunder technique. Everything is up to you. The woman's eyes wandered. It was still a little impatient. Song Jung-chun wanted me to tell you that Dallas' national strength was damaged because of that person. This matter was his own decision and has nothing to do with you. You don't have to think too much about it. The woman in palace attire was on the verge of tears. She raised her head and looked in the direction of the palace. At this moment, she was extremely charming. She said in a soft and trembling voice, "Your Majesty." Suddenly its voice became shrill. "Stinky, rotten woman, you vixen, hurry up and get out of the capital. I've been tolerating you for a long time." The woman in palace attire asked with a smile, "Did His Majesty also say this?" It snorted coldly, flapped its wings, and flew high into the sky, disappearing in the blink of an eye. After the golden falcon left, the woman staggered and supported herself with both hands on the city wall, her face deathly pale. The Bamboo Leaf Pavilion was a spy organization that she had painstakingly built. It was a shadow pillar of the Dali dynasty and was almost her 3rd son. Kuidong was a little sad. Killing someone is just a matter of nodding your head to the ground, but the pain of your heart being pierced will last for thousands of years. However, even though Kuidong now held the power of life and death in the Bamboo Leaf Pavilion, he still couldn't feel happy at all. Because the body of the young man that had restored the mental connection seemed to have completely disappeared. Even that old Yang chose to turn a blind eye. He was unwilling to send any news back to Dallas capital. The turbulent and dangerous shoals of the Chongdan River were no different from the gates of hell in the eyes of the common people. Therefore, every time the boatman returned with a guest, he would have a bountiful harvest and a bulging bag. The boat was tied to the riverside that ran through the town. Off the boat, there were brothels and restaurants where orioles sang and swallows danced. There were also many small taverns that sold cheap and inferior liquor. Most of them were beautiful women soliciting business for the boatman to get drunk. If the boatman could persuade the scholars on the boat to take the opportunity to go to the taverns and brothels that they were familiar with, there would be an additional considerable income under the table. Today, someone hired a boatman to tour that section of the river where the stone forest was as tightly guarded as spears and halberds. The boatman was a stout man of about 50 years old, but his body was still robust and his arms were bulging with muscles. He was also talkative. The guest who hired the boat was an old gentleman. He looked shabby, but his spending was passable. He gave 10 taels of silver and looked at least 60 years old. However, he still wanted to travel alone, which made the boatman somewhat puzzled. The boat bobbed up and down in the turbulent current. Waves constantly splashed onto the 2 people. The boatman looked at the old gentleman leaning sideways with both hands tightly grasping the side of the boat. He laughed in his heart. Scholars, regardless of age, seemed to be like this. For example, the boatman really didn't understand what was so interesting about those stones in the water. Could they talk, or were they more beautiful than the women on both sides of the river in our Red Candle town? Spending money to buy suffering, the brains of scholars really couldn't understand. After the boat sailed out of the dangerous shoals, it came to the smooth surface of the Chongdan River. After the boatman roughly told the old story of the Empress Temple, he casually asked, "Old master, are you a foreigner? Where are you from?" "But our Dali official language is passable. My hometown is far away. I just like to visit the scenery, walk around, and have no worries. It's comfortable. You don't look young anymore. You have to take it easy. It's okay, it's okay. Old master, let me ask you a question. You have traveled extensively, so you must have been to many places. What do you think of our Dallas scenery?" "Very good, very good. It's a place of great people." "Then is the wine in our Red Candle town good?" "It's good, it's good. It's just a little expensive." "Then isn't our emperor very powerful?" "Very powerful." "Is our Dali imperial tutor's chess skills better than those of the Great Sway Kingdom?" "It should be." "Is our Dali the strongest in the north?" Of course, of course." In fact, except for the first question, the boatman deliberately teased the old man with a series of questions, because he found that the old man was really a nice guy who liked to nod and agree with everything. When they were about to go ashore, the boatman saw the old man nodding with a sincere face again. He couldn't help but laugh. "Old master, you have a good temper, but it's too good. How can you only say nice things like that? The scholars I have met before, big and small, old and young, there are at least 100 of them. They all speak in a genteel and sarcastic manner, making people unable to understand what they are saying, making people feel that they are very knowledgeable. Alas, it's a pity that I'm not good at understanding. I haven't been to school, and I don't have a teacher to guide me. Even if I want to interrupt, it's difficult. As long as you have the heart, nothing is difficult." The old man laughed and then asked, "By the way, have you heard of Mr. Chi from Cliff Academy?" The boatman hesitated, sighed softly, and finally shook his head. "Never heard of him." The old man nodded and said with a smile, "Dali is a little different." "Why?" "I passed by a small beacon at the border where there were only 2 people. In the end, an immortal descended and asked for food. If it were any other country, they would have knelt down and offered it with both hands. But you Dali soldiers are different. You talk to the immortals with a straight back. Of course, it's inevitable that you're nervous." The boatman laughed and said, "Old master, you've seen immortals before? Then you didn't walk so far in vain. You're better than me. Those tourists say that there are water ghosts and river grannies under the Chongdan River, but I've been rowing for 30 years and haven't seen anything strange." The old man smiled and said, "That's right, I've seen it before. It's just that those immortals have bad tempers. Those 2 beacon fire soldiers were slapped and sent flying, smashing all the tables and stools into smithereens. But one immortal, after eating and drinking to his heart's content, threw a gold ingot on the ground before leaving." The boatman said enviously, "Wouldn't that be a fortune? If it were me, not to mention 1 slap, 10 slaps would be enough." The old man nodded and said approvingly, "You have a big heart. It's a good thing, a good thing." The boatman suddenly asked worriedly, "By the way, those immortals didn't make things difficult for you, old master, did they?" The old man looked at the sincere old man and laughed heartily. "They didn't make things difficult, they didn't make things difficult." After the boatman felt relieved, he wanted to tease this interesting old man. He asked, "Old master, do you want to drink?" The boatman blinked and tried hard to hold back his laughter. He whispered, "It's wine with prostitutes. I can lead the way." The old man's eyes widened and he squeezed out 3 words. "Is it expensive?" The boatman laughed heartily and decided not to tease the old man anymore. "It's expensive." The old man struggled with himself. "It's okay. Wait for me when we get ashore. I'll go borrow money from someone. Maybe I can borrow 20 or 30 taels of silver." The boatman was stunned for a moment. He was an honest man after all and naturally couldn't bear to take him to a brothel where money flowed like water. "Old master, I'm just joking with you. The wine with prostitutes is boring." Thinking of drinking 2 or 3 taels of silver in 1 cup, I'll be so distressed that I won't even care about the taste of the wine. Let's not go. If you really want to drink, I'll take you to a small wine shop on the shore. It's an authentic local brew in Red Candle Town. The price can be considered fair." The boat slowly approached the shore. The old man stood up and patted the boatman's shoulder. He said with a smile, "Good words but evil deeds. You're a national demon." The robust boatman's face suddenly turned pale. He wanted to retreat, but he couldn't move at all. He wanted to jump into the water, reveal his original form and quickly escape, but that was an extravagant hope. The old man continued with a smile. "Words can't speak, but actions can be taken. You're a national treasure. I hope you can stick to your heart and do good deeds." The old man's chest seemed to be filled with an inexplicable awe-inspiring aura. He wanted to speak, but he couldn't say a word. After the old scholar went ashore, he slowly left. The boatman's eyes were brimming with tears. When he was finally able to move, he immediately jumped ashore and knelt down in front of the old man's back. He performed the 3 kneels and 9 kowtows ceremony. It was said that there was a saint in heaven and earth. His mouth contained the heavenly law, and his words were law. The old scholar asked all the way until he reached the door of the pillow relay station. He asked if the young man called Chen Pingan was still there. The relay station guard asked who he was. The old scholar thought for a moment and said that he was half a teacher of the young man. In the end, the relay station guard told him to get lost. For some unknown reason, a handsome young man with a mole between his eyebrows had been obediently staying in an old school these days. Every day, he would hold a book and read. What was even stranger was that the young man would often cry until his face was covered with snot and tears. 118. Previously, at the junction of Dragonbeard Creek and Tiefu River, there was a majestic waterfall. But now, Dragonbeard Creek should be called Dragonbeard River, and Tiefu River was also changed to Tiefu River. In the night, there was a beautiful woman holding a golden tassel sword. She stood on the green stone cliff at the junction of the creek and the river. The young woman had an excellent figure, and the clothes around her chest bulged up high. It could be said that when one looked down, one would not be able to see the tips of her feet. So much so that the golden tassel of her sword was entwined just like that. She was the personal servant girl of the Empress. Although she was extremely beautiful, she had a vulgar name of a country woman, Yang Hua. The woman first threw the Eastern treasured Bottle Island sword, which was originally called a talisman, into the river. She took a deep breath and began to take off her clothes. She took them off one by one and casually threw them into the splashing water of Tiefu River. In the end, she revealed a curvaceous, flawless, and perfect body. Bathed in the moonlight and mist, she looked even more ethereal. Then, she took a step forward, and her slender body fell straight down. She wanted to enter the water and become a god. The woman Yang Hua, who had obtained the decree of the Dali Imperial Court, was going to become a river god of this Tiefu River tonight. The counties of the Dali dynasty were divided into big, small, medium, and 3 grades. The rivers were the same. The streams under the river were the lowest level of water spirits. Even if the imperial court conferred a god to oversee a waterway, they would only be given the title of River Granny. They were not allowed to overstep the conferred god. The rivers above were divided into high, medium, and low grades. Dragonbeard Creek had risen 2 grades, from a stream to a medium-grade river. There was no difference between the river above the river and the river below. Now, Tiefu River had become a big river. It was just that Tiefu River and Dragonbeard River, these 2 connected rivers, temporarily did not build a shrine to the river god, nor did they build a statue of the god. Everything was simple. The 2 new righteous gods of Jianghe were not familiar names in Longquan County. Among them, the Iron Fujiang righteous god was called Yang Hua. Compared to God Jiang's conferment, the Dali Imperial Court conferred 3 orthodox mountain gods in one go: Mount Cloud, Mount Jianxiang, and Mount Luopa. The investiture ceremony was grand and mighty. Emperor Dali personally wrote an imperial edict. Sage Wan Sha helped to announce the opening of the altar. The assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites read out the contents. Qintianjian Mr. Qing Wu's gold and jade burial. The local official, Longquan County's county magistrate Wu Yuan, unveiled the 2 clay golden-bodied deity statues, and so on. There was a series of complicated formalities, not missing the slightest bit. The Eastern Treasure Bottle Continent's mountain deity was divided into the 5 mountain deities, the normal mountain deity, and the earth deity. There were a total of 3 levels, and the commoners called him the Lord of the Land. Generally speaking, the size of a mountain range was fixed even after hundreds or thousands of years. Therefore, it was difficult for the earth mountain deity to be promoted on the spot. However, it was not absolute. If there was an expert who cultivated in the earth realm and was regarded highly by the imperial court, and became an imperial tutor or supreme with a high status, it was possible for him to rise to the top. After all, it was not about the height of a mountain. Among them, the mountain deity of Mount Luorpa was particularly strange. Only its surname was Song. Compared to the other 2 clay statues, this mountain deity statue was specially made with a golden head. The rest of its clothes were painted, and it was not smeared with gold powder. It was said that this was a secret edict issued by the imperial court. In the turbid river, there was a turbulent waterfall crashing down from above. The tip of the woman's foot lightly stepped on the hilt of the precious Taoist sword. The golden tassel was like a vine, and it was unknown when it gently wrapped around her ankle. Treasures aroused the envy of others. The eyelashes of the woman who closed her eyes trembled slightly, and tears slowly flowed out of her eyes. Being at the bottom of the river, the tears naturally disappeared in a flash. Even though her physique was different from ordinary people, and she was close to the river since she was young, there was a wandering Taoist who came to her house when she was young and checked her horoscope. He said that she would easily attract all kinds of evil things in the water, so it was best not to go near the water source alone, especially the place where the rootless water temporarily gathered. The girl surnamed Yang Minghua gradually grew up. Very soon, she was chosen by a Mr. Qing Wu from the Great Li dynasty, and was brought to the goddess side. She practiced the superior water technique, and her cultivation base advanced by leaps and bounds. It was possible that just 3 years of practice would be equivalent to 30 years of hard work for other people, or even longer. However, the real reason that forced her to embark on this road of no return. One had to know that becoming a river deity had always been regarded as a dead end by orthodox qi cultivators. It was not the right way to live a long life at all. Imagine a longevity bridge. If one knew that it collapsed halfway and people could not reach the other side, then what kind of longevity bridge was it? She knew in her heart that this was called possessing a jade ring becomes a crime. Because she was recognized by the capital city rune sword, she successfully controlled the talisman before the young swordsman Liu Baqiao of the Wind and Thunder Garden made his move. After obtaining this great opportunity, her cultivation level skyrocketed. Just when she thought that the upper 5 states was just around the corner, but at the same time, bad news came one after another silently. First, the goddess asked her to take out the rune sword and give it to Ron Cheng, who was in charge of Dezhu, to split open the dragon-slaying platform twice. Then, the rune sword that was returned to her was already in a state where it was almost broken. What else could she do? One was the goddess who gave her a new lease of life, and the other was the military saint who was treated as a distinguished guest by the Dali. She could only grit her teeth and accept this result. However, she did not expect that the emperor would temporarily confer her the title of the water god of the Tiefu River. In the river, the woman who stood on the sword hovered motionlessly, just like a god standing on a shrine. She abandoned all distracting thoughts and began to calm her mind and concentrate. Her hands formed a seal and she was as still as a mountain. First, her fine black hair fell off strand by strand and dissipated in the river, disappearing with the flow. Then, her flesh and blood melted little by little. The intense pain did not only come from her flesh and blood, but also from the depths of her soul. The woman's delicate body, which was gradually becoming a bloody mess, was still trembling incessantly, even though Dali's secret technique isolated her senses. She was so skinny that her bones stood up. In the end, the woman was reduced to a real skeleton. The water surface boiled and steam rose high. The half-destroyed rune sword remained motionless at the bottom of the river, but the horrifying skeleton of the woman could be faintly seen. It began to sway like floating water plants. It was extremely fragile, as if it could be washed away by the river at any time. At the critical moment, the golden tassel of the Taoist rune sword, talisman, began to emit golden rays of light. Not only did it bind the woman's ankle more tightly, it also continued to climb up slowly and finally stopped at the knee of the skeleton. This allowed the skeleton to stabilize her body and help her not to be despised by the mysterious spirit contained in the river and completely become the lowest class of water ghost otherworldly item. Condensing divinity, reconstructing the golden body, the body became a false saint. The first strand of hair began to grow on the top of the skeleton's head. It was not the dark green hair of the old woman of the Dragon Whisker Creek, but light golden hair. Strands of hair appeared on the white bones and became more luxuriant. Finally, they gathered into a long golden hair that was dozens of feet long. It was extremely gorgeous. This was the sign of a rain master that was rarely seen in 100 years. The gods of the rivers in the world, no matter big or small, were ultimately attached to the earth and flowed with the flow. However, the rain master that was almost extinct in the Aquarius continent could be regarded as a god in the heavens. Although the rank of a rain master was not much higher than a river god, the difference was like an ordinary chi cultivator fighting against a swordsman of the same level. It was a bit similar to the old man who held a lantern in the officialdom. The position of a doctor was much more important than other Dali officials of the same rank. The Da Luo golden immortal that was revered by Taoists, the Arhat golden body of the Buddhist protectors, the clay golden bodies of the gods in the world, and the so-called golden branches and jade leaves of the secular dynasties all had the word golden. Among them, the golden body dharma of the gods was actually an illusion. It did not mean that the gods really achieved a golden body all over their body. The golden body of the Dragon Beard River's granny, he was actually just a little golden light in her eyes. However, this woman had a head of golden hair that symbolized the qualification of a rain master. The difference was like heaven and earth. The woman began to recover her appearance. Flesh grew from bones. When she finally opened her eyes, she was already more beautiful than before. A green dress condensed from the essence of the river wrapped around her extremely attractive body. She walked forward slowly as if she was walking on flat ground. She breathed freely. Compared to cultivating in the cave that was full of spiritual energy, she felt more satisfied. The woman raised her hand and the talisman sword that had never been unsheathed jumped out from the bottom of the river by itself. She held it in her hand and held it horizontally in front of her. She gently pulled the sword out of the scabbard and stared at the shocking cracks. They were like scars on a beauty's face, making people feel sorry and pitiful. Yang Hua, who had already become the Dali River god, turned her wrist and held the talisman sword upright. She looked down and stared at the sword that was as sharp as before. She said softly, "In the end, only you did not leave me." The talisman sword trembled slightly and its spiritual energy was exhausted. It was like a withered old man on a sickbed, without any spirit. "I won't abandon you. It's good that we have a dead end. We will walk to the end together." Yang Hua lowered her head and turned her cheek slightly. She used the sharp blade to cut a bloody groove on her face. It was so deep that the bone could be seen. The talisman river water rolled and flowed. The momentum of the water became more and more vigorous. It was murderous and there was no trace of resentment or melancholy. Everything in the world was a crime because of one's wealth. People in the world who had sharp weapons would naturally have murderous intentions. On the back of the green ox by the Dragon Whisker River, an old man squatted on the stone cliff and smoked. A young woman sat carefully on the edge of the stone cliff. Her hair hung down and extended into the river. Now that she had been promoted to the legitimate river god recognized by the Dali Imperial Court, she could rely on this method to go ashore temporarily. Don't underestimate this small step. Even if you practiced for hundreds or thousands of years, you would still be powerless. The woman whose long hair covered the water below the stone cliff timidly said, "Immortal, why can't I, Ma Lanhua, have a river god temple? Even if it's just a small temple, it'll be fine." The old man puffed and sneered, "With your rotten reputation, you still want to have continuous incense. I'm afraid it's only a few big water tanks worth of saliva. Moreover, do you think that by enjoying the incense, you can guarantee a good harvest? Moreover, It's just a business where you can lie down and enjoy life without doing anything. The woman smiled embarrassedly. Immortal, you know that I'm a village woman with long hair and short knowledge. Please tell me, lest I commit another taboo and anger a certain big shot. I'm not afraid of being beaten, but if I cause trouble for you, I'll feel terrible. When she said that her hair was long and her knowledge was short, the woman glanced at her black hair from the corner of her eyes and felt slightly proud. Her hair was long, but it was really long. Those foolish women with short lifespans in the small town, many of them had grey hair when they were in their 40s. How could they be compared to her? In terms of identity and family background, what could they use to be compared to her, a dignified river god? The old man slowly said, once the temple is set up, the altar is set up, and the incense burner is set up. After the first incense is lit, you can be considered to be truly dependent on this land. For example, when there were 2 earthquakes from Red Candle Town, Longquan County also shook and the river swayed. If you have an ancestral temple and a clay statue, then you will suffer the impact of this kind of vibration. Although the woman pretended to nod in agreement, she did not think so in her heart. The old man was expressionless. He held the pipe in one hand and casually knocked on the stone cliff with his free hand. The woman's flesh and blood instantly cracked inch by inch, causing her to fall into the river from the pain. She wailed with all her might under the water, and her body twisted and rolled crazily. The old man turned a blind eye to this and said slowly, "Why did the righteous God of mountains and rivers choose to follow the king at the foot of the mountain to help keep the people on the mountain in check? Other than the source of incense, the fights between the immortals on the mountain will affect the rise and fall of the fate of the land. This is also the key. Who would be willing to be in a precarious situation? Who knows if their golden body will be severely injured tomorrow and they will disappear from the world the day after tomorrow? Other than that, the folk customs, culture, education, weapons, and many other things will also affect your cultivation. It can be subtle or sudden, but it can't be changed by the will of the gods. The former is like cutting flesh with a blunt knife, while the latter is a disaster from the sky. You should cherish the current leisure time. This is the real carefree and happy life like a god." The woman didn't dare to go ashore anymore. Her pale head slowly floated to the surface of the water and begged for mercy. "Great immortal, I know the severity of the situation." The old man waved his hand. "Go away." The woman dived into the water and swayed her waist. Her figure instantly passed through the stone arch bridge and escaped 2 to 3 miles away on the waterway. The woman who used to be a river woman leisurely passed by the section of the river where the blacksmith shop was. Now she was not so afraid of the little girl with powerful means. After all, in addition to working diligently for the military saint and increasing the gloomy weight of the flowing water, she was occasionally called by the little girl to ask about the past of the small town. Over time, she felt that her waist had become very strong. As for the girl Xiuxiu, who was very strange in the woman's eyes, according to their chat, the woman knew that in addition to forging every day, she continued to keep an eye on the old house that was about to be repaired. She also helped to clean a few houses every few days. She also moved the cage of old hens and chicks to the blacksmith shop. In fact, the woman didn't understand the girl's thoughts at all. How could the only daughter of the military saint live like a daughter of an ordinary family in a small town? Not to mention that it was boring, she didn't have any great ambitions. However, she didn't dare to tell Ruan Xiu her thoughts. After she became the legitimate river god, she felt the power of the fire dragon even more deeply. However, the woman now felt that she really had a backer. She thought that she and Xiuxiu had turned from enemies to friends. She could even be considered half of the military saint's helper. Moreover, she could be considered as old Yang's unofficial disciple. These things made the woman very proud. In fact, she also remembered the beating, but she was a little forgetful. She often forgot the pain after the scar healed. However, she enjoyed it. The old man sitting alone on the back of the green ox sighed. A frog at the bottom of the well forgets his worries when he sees the full moon. After a long time, a young man with a cinnabar mark between his eyebrows slowly walked up the stone cliff. He squatted beside the old man and sighed. Old Yang smiled and asked, "Did you study a lot at school today?" The young man imperial tutor was hurt by this sentence. He was so angry that his whole body trembled. The old man didn't continue to sprinkle salt on his wound. After all, they were temporary allies. The clay statues of the Yuan family's Wenchang Pavilion and the Cao family's Marshall Saint Temple have already been built, right? But the location hasn't been decided yet. Don't you want to help that student of yours? Are you really willing to see his career break in this Longquan County? The handsome young man with a cinnabar mark between his eyebrows said dejectedly, if it was in the past, I would have a backup plan. Do you think I still need to do this now? Old Yang nodded, it's a little tragic. The young man said angrily, hey, Old Yang, it's fine if you didn't help me at that time, but you still have the nerve to mock me. Old Yang was unmoved, at most, I'm being sarcastic. It's not called mocking. The old man thought for a while and said, I'm willing to put down my old face and plead for you. Is it useful? The young man stammered, I have to speak up for justice and say something. The young man leaned back and lay on the uneven green cliff. Looking at the deep night sky, he muttered to himself, did you and Song Jianqiang have a private alliance like me? Old man Yang smiled and said, yes, and he didn't try to hide it. Otherwise, Li wouldn't have made such a big fuss with Song Changjing. Instead of letting your emperor worry, it's better to put it on the table and let him see it himself. That way, he'll know what's going on. However, I reckon that with Song Jianqiang's unruly personality, when he arrives in the capital, he will definitely tell us everything. The young man said angrily, my luck is just not as good as Song Jianqiang's. I shouldn't have come to this broken place. What kind of paradise is this? This damn place is my, Kuidong's, land of calamity. The old man smiled, for the other half of the imperial tutor, Kuidong, that might not be the case. The young man sat up and said angrily, Old Yang, if you talk like that again, I'll fight you to the death. Old Yang turned to look at the young man who had suffered one disaster after another. He stopped adding fuel to the fire. Have you realized that after you were cut off, you've changed a lot? The young man frowned and wondered, have I? The old man nodded and said seriously, yes. Your temperament has gradually changed, and your soul has gradually stabilized. Although your cultivation is negligible, compared to the previous imperial tutor, Kuidong, you finally look a little like the young Kuidong. The young man's face was ashen, and his eyes were burning. The old man looked into the distance and joked, it seems that studying is still useful. Kuidong, who was originally living in this precious body, was now like an immigrant who had migrated to a distant place and took root in the local area. Kuidong was divided into two. Imperial tutor, Kuidong, had lost a part of his soul. The body that the young Kuidong's soul resided in was both a place to stand and a cage. The young man did not want to be entangled in this matter. He was afraid that he would drown himself if he could not help it. He quickly changed the topic. His Majesty did not agree to merge Dragon Beard Creek and Tiefu River into one river and then divide it all to Hepo. Instead, he divided them into two and promoted them separately. At the same time, Song Yuzhang, who had died of illness here, was promoted to the mountain god of Luopo Mountain without any warning. Furthermore, he ordered people to secretly create a golden head and send it to Longquan County. In this way, he gave imperial younger brother Song Jianqiang and that person who slept beside him 50 times each. Old Yang looked at the rolling mountain range and peaks in the west and asked, you Kuidong, imperial tutor, also need to figure out the emperor's heart like this? The young man was stunned and sighed deeply. Firstly, he has been in a cage for a long time, the horse is thin and the hair is long, and the man is poor and the ambition is short. Secondly, that His Majesty the Emperor is ambitious and likes to scheme openly. He is upright and really cannot be underestimated. If it was another dynasty, Song Jianqiang would have already usurped the throne. As for that woman, she might have already tasted the taste of an empress. Although the Eastern Treasure Bottle continent is small, there is one thing that other continents do not have, and that is that in the official history, there has never been an empress who ruled over the world. Who knows how many women are restless, wanting to take the lead and use this chance to be immortalized in history. Even if they have to go down in infamy for 10,000 years, they would still be willing. I just don't know if Dali can get through this hurdle. Even if he does, Who knows how many years he will be pushed back? However, in the world, only I know what Alliance wants to do, and can guess what he will do. As he finished speaking, the young man suddenly became spirited. Old Yang asked, the capital's Kui Dong also does not know? The young man sighed and said with a complicated expression, about that, I don't think I know. The young man used all his strength to rub his cheeks. That Dragontail County's Chen family suddenly opened a school here and taught all the children in Longquan County for free. They hired 3 teachers with a large sum of money, and all of them are great scholars and literary heroes whose names shook the county. They are all guests who have close relations with the Chen family. Is there any incitement from the Yingyin Chen family? Is it their scholarly faction that is plotting something in the Aquarius continent? Old Yang chuckled, I know about this karma, but I will not tell you. Anyways, you are about to roll out of here. For me to talk to you for so long, it is already very benevolent of me. The young man Kui Dong was not angry this time. It's good that you left. After the young man stood up, his face instantly changed. He was so angry that he stomped his feet and scolded, good my ass. Bringing along 2 troublesome burdens is fine, I can bear with it. But to want me to be that brat's disciple, what is going on? Old man, what are you thinking? Is it because without your cultivation, without your status, you have lost all your knowledge? If you dare to stand in front of me now, I guarantee that I will scold you until your head bleeds. Old man, you are shameless, you are a scoundrel, do you know that? As a person, you have to have some conscience and reason. Old Yang gave a thumbs up and clicked his tongue, young man is chivalrous and courageous. The young man suddenly stopped scolding and asked in a low voice, I didn't mention any names. The old man used to be extremely powerful, but that was so many years ago. Now, there's only a little left. You can't possibly still hear my words, right? Old Yang stood up and put away his pipe, he patted his butt and prepared to leave. That is hard to say, after all, you were his first disciple, you might be an exception. The young man Kui Dong laughed dryly and comforted himself, impossible, impossible. At this time, the most common scholarly books appeared in front of the young man, no one flipped them, but they slowly opened to the first page. The young man with the cinnabar mark on his forehead was dumbstruck, as if he was grieving for his parents. Old Yang walked away. Sigh, someone wants to read again. The young man's eyes were lifeless as he straightened his clothes. He straightened his back and began to recite loudly, Heaven and earth have righteous energy, the chaos is manifold. Below are rivers and mountains, above are the sun and stars. The young man suddenly came back to his senses and looked at the old man's back. Damn you. Did you deliberately leak my secret and pass my words to the old man? Old bastard, how can you bully people like that? I only exposed your identity. Do you have to bear a grudge? The young man's hand trembled for no reason. He was in so much pain that he shuddered, as if there was a strict teacher standing at the side, beating a naughty student with a ruler. The young man continued to roar, to people, it is vast and abundant, filling the sky. The royal road should be cleared of barbarians, Hanha spits out the court. At the entrance of the Pillow Inn in Red Candle Town, the courier who had spoken ill of a poor old man probably felt that he couldn't fight with an old man. In the end, he cursed and told the old man the answer, saying that those people had left by boat during the day and were heading south along the Embroidery River. When the courier saw the old man turn and leave, he spat on the ground fiercely, only later remembering that it was at the entrance of his relay station, he resentfully wiped it off with the tip of his foot. Since those children came to the Pillow relay station, strange things had happened one after another, and in the end, they even caused the kind posthouse official to lose his official position. They were really a bunch of jinxes. The old man walked on the street with a bag on his back. After thinking carefully, he decided to give up on the spot. The road was long enough to know people's hearts. The old man quietly reached out, grabbed a jasper hairpin, and put it back into his sleeve. Those children went south to the Great Sway Kingdom, and the old scholar went west. The road was facing the sky, and they went on different sides. Whether they would reach the same destination by different routes, he did not know. But the road under his feet had to be taken step by step. On a large ship, Chen Pingan and the other 3 could only stand at the bow because of an eyesore of a white donkey. They could not sit comfortably in the cabin. Fortunately, the four of them were already used to the hard life of living in the open. Li Huai was a little angry at the ship owner for looking down on them, but he soon smiled and asked Lin Shuyi to help lead the donkey. He climbed on the donkey's back, sat on the boat, and rode the donkey, which made Li Huai smile from ear to ear. The passengers on the nearby large ships looked at the young men and children as if they were idiots. Lin Shuyi held the reins, and the river breeze came slowly, gently blowing the young man's hair. The young man touched his chest, where the yellow paper talisman and cloud gem book were. Chen Pinggan squatted at the side, skillfully chopping the green bamboo with a hatchet. He had promised to make 2 small boxes for Lin Shuyi and Li Huai. The little girl in the red cotton-padded jacket, who was squatting and unwilling to take off the emerald green box, suddenly said in surprise, "Young martial uncle, your hairpin is gone. It was still there before we got on the boat." Chen Pinggan was stunned, and touched the bun on his head, a little confused. But during this period, the young man was used to all kinds of accidents. Although he was disappointed, he still smiled and said, "It's okay, I remember the 8 words. I will make one for myself and engrave the same words on it." Li Baoping nodded. Walking on the street of Red Candle Town, the old scholar smiled and whispered, "Good." 119. The embroidery river was very delicate with green waves. There were no strong winds or strong waves. The water surface was wide, but it gave people a gentle feeling. The boat that Chen Pinggan and the other 3 took to the south had 2 decks. Most of them were Confucian scholars in green robes and merchants. Li Baoping was not afraid of strangers. She liked to carry a small book box and join the crowd. She would perk up her ears to listen to the people talking loudly. When ordinary scholars saw a young lady who looked lively and carried a small book box made of green bamboo that was used to travel far to seek knowledge, standing at a distance that was neither too far nor too close, the adults would smile kindly and not take the young lady to heart. They would continue to chat and talk without restraint. Li Huai carefully controlled the reins and rode the white donkey in a small circle at the bow of the boat. He was like a general patrolling the border, unparalleled in the world. It was strange that the white donkey was only willing to let Li Huai ride it. This made Li Huai very happy. As for Wei Jin of the Wind Snow Temple, he would be coming to take the donkey away in the future. At that time, he would ask Li Huai to remember to ask for remuneration from that person. He could just ask for an exorbitant price. These important matters were all ignored by Li Huai. Lin Shuyi came to Chen Pinggan's side and sat with his back leaning against the inner wall of the boat. He hesitated for a while and asked, "Don't you want to know why Alliance said that I am a Qi refinement warrior? And how did I become a Qi refinement warrior?" Chen Pinggan stopped the chopping action of the hatchet in his hand and smiled. "Of course I want to know. But there is no point in asking. I am afraid that you will think too much." Lin Shuyi was a little depressed. Among the 3 people in the school, even a blind person could tell that the only person that Chen Pinggan really cared about was Li Baoping. Between him and Li Huai, Chen Pinggan should be closer to Li Huai. As for whether it was because they both grew up in small towns, or because he was too quiet, Lin Shuyi wasn't sure. Moreover, the youth never really cared about these trivial matters that weren't worth mentioning. But Lin Shuyi couldn't help but feel depressed. Lin Shuyi asked, "Do you know how powerful that small silver gourd is?" Chen Pinggan looked around calmly, then nodded and said in a low voice, "Even Alliance said that this is a rare sword-cultivating gourd." "Of course, it's precious and rare." Lin Shuyi said, "Then do you know how big of an opportunity you missed when you refused to drink because you practiced martial arts? The reason why I could officially ascend the mountain and become a Qi refinement warrior, an immortal on the mountain in the eyes of ordinary people, was because I drank the wine in the small gourd time and time again. After drinking the wine, I could feel that no matter if it was my blood, flesh, bones, vision, hearing, or even the strength of my legs, I could even keep up with your footsteps in the end. Can't you tell?" Chen Pinggan's fingers subconsciously rubbed the cool green bamboo. "After leaving the Tiefu River and approaching the Chiduan Mountain, you'll actually have an easier time walking on the mountain road at the back." Lin Shuyi's expression didn't change. He said lightly, "Oh. So you've already seen through it." Chen Pinggan smiled and said, Alliance is very lazy. He's very capable, but he's not willing to take care of small matters. Since I'm leading the way, of course, I have to take care of the strength of each of your legs. You have to know when to stop and rest. Not only do you not have to be so tired from walking, but you also have to try your best to increase your strength by walking. We still have a long way to go in the future. I hope that everyone won't have to suffer so much in the future. Lin Shuyi looked at Chen Ping'an's expression and eyes. He crossed his arms and snorted for no reason. I won't believe it if others say this. Chen Ping'an raised the bamboo in his hand and asked with a smile, "It's getting better and better. However, the last bamboo box is definitely the best. Then, I'll give this one to Li Huai first. I'll make it smaller then." Lin Shuyi glanced at Awesome, who was riding on the old donkey. He shook his head and said, "Forget it, make it for me first. At most, I'll be nagged by him." Chen Ping'an smiled, "Then I'll try my best to make it sturdier for you. Use more rope. You're an immortal after all. If you can really fly around like Alliance, if it's not sturdy enough, I'm afraid you won't be able to carry it for more than a few days." Lin Shuyi sighed. He felt that he wasn't stupid, but it was really difficult to keep up with this guy's thoughts. He thought of something that he couldn't figure out and asked curiously, "Why did you tell Li Baoping everything about Zhu He and Zhu Lu not long after Alliance left at the Pillow Inn?" Chen Ping'an's expression turned serious and asked back, "Do you think I have a better relationship with Baoping or with that pair of father and daughter?" Lin Shuyi said angrily, "Nonsense." Chen Ping'an nodded and said, "So I have to let Baoping know clearly what the people who came out of her house did. I have a rough idea of what kind of person Zhu Lu is. When Alliance deliberately set a trap for her, she wasn't just hesitating. She was hoping that her father, Zhu He, would stand up for her again. If we were in danger because of her messing around at Chiduan Mountain, but since everyone was safe and sound after the incident, I can think of it as her eagerness to save her father. If I put myself in her shoes, I might not have done better than her. So although I was angry, I would never complain to her face. However, in the corridor of the Pillow Inn, Zhu Lu's actions are really unforgivable. I think as long as she doesn't give too many benefits, Zhu Lu will betray everyone, let alone her daughter Baoping." Chen Ping'an was a little sad. If she still has such a character, one day, her father will really be killed by her. I don't want a good person like Zhu He to die in the hands of his daughter after leaving Red Candle Town alive. Why doesn't she know how to cherish her father even though she has one? Lin Shuyi's expression was cold. "Do you think that every parent in the world is good?" Chen Ping'an said firmly, "I don't care about others, but my parents are very good." Lin Shuyi's expression was a little ugly. However, Chen Ping'an's words eased the teenager's expression a little. Zhu He is a good person, but he doesn't seem to know how to teach his children how to behave. For some things, if it's so obvious who's right and who's wrong, why don't he teach them? I can't figure it out. Lin Shuyi, you're a smart person. Do you know the reason? Lin Shuyi looked a little tired. Maybe it's because it's dark under the light. However, parents in the world couldn't be summed up with a simple phrase, the heart of parents in the world. Chen Ping'an, every family has its own difficulties. Your parents left early, so there are some things that you don't have to worry about. Of course, I don't have any other meaning. If it's unpleasant to hear, don't take it to heart. Chen Ping'an waved his hand and smiled, "Of course not." Lin Shuyi glanced at Chen Ping'an's bun. "The hairpin is gone just like that. Aren't you going to look for it?" Chen Ping'an lowered his head and continued to forge the small box, shaking his head, "I can't find it. Do you think that a greedy person like me will lose such a valuable thing?" Lin Shuyi's expression suddenly became strange. "Could it be that Alliance said that I should change my name with yours?" Chen Ping'an asked curiously, "Is there a reason behind this?" Lin Shuyi had already changed the topic. He leaned forward slightly and gestured to Chen Ping'an, who was an expert. "Can you make a little curve here? Otherwise, it's too square and rigid. It's better to have a degree of roundness. It'll be more comfortable to look at from afar." Chen Ping'an nodded and said, "I'll try my best. If the result is not good, I won't care anymore." Lin Shuyi knew that this guy was a man of his word. If he said he wouldn't care, then he really wouldn't care. Therefore, Lin Shuyi, who actually had great expectations for the small box, suddenly became anxious and quickened his tone. How can that be? These bamboos from Chiduan Mountain are very particular. Every piece that is used is one less piece. My box must be pleasing to the eye, and at the same time, take into account the advantages of practicality and firmness. Chen Pinggan, you can slow down when you're chopping. Think more when you're building the frame of the bamboo box. Chen Pinggan was still chopping as if he was flying. Small pieces of bamboo kept falling from the ground, and then Chen Pinggan put them into the basket on his back one by one. Lin Shuyi was shocked. Chen Pinggan caught a glimpse of the cold teenager's anxious look from the corner of his eye and held back his laughter. Why don't I make your box last? The teenager said angrily, my name is Lin Shuyi. Am I the kind of person who likes to go back on his words? Chen Pinggan suddenly understood why Alliance liked to play tricks so much. It felt good. Li Huai led the donkey to the two of them and asked casually, Chen Pinggan, do you think Alliance will be back tomorrow? Chen Pinggan looked up and said, have you forgotten? Li Huai hurriedly covered his mouth. After he let go, he looked around with shifty eyes. He then let go of the reins and squatted in front of Chen Pinggan. He lowered his voice and said, then the day after tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow. Anyway, at the latest, we'll get off the boat. If Alliance doesn't come back by then I won't recognize him as a friend in the future. Chen Pinggan, tell me, am I being very kind? Right. When Alliance kneels on the ground and begs me, yes, you can put in a good word for him. When the time comes, I'll reluctantly agree and continue to be friends with Alliance. Lin Shuyi simply closed his eyes. Turning a blind eye to Li Huai, his classmate, was a very good choice. Lin Shuyi had never seen such a person who deserved a beating. He really wondered if he would gloat when Li Huai got into trouble one day. He heard the neigh of a donkey, followed by the sound of a child falling down and crying. When Li Huai turned to look, he was a little stunned. It was the white donkey that had caused trouble. The unlucky child probably thought it was fun and ran over to tease the donkey, but the beast had a bad temper. Although it would not hurt people, it would definitely scare the little fellow who dared to mess with it. For example, it was raising its hooves and stomping heavily on the deck of the boat again and again. It was so scared that the child sitting on the ground did not dare to cry anymore. Chen Pinggan suddenly put down the knife and bamboo in his hand and quickly walked over to carefully help the child up. He then reached out to press the white donkey twice. When the white donkey saw Chen Pinggan's hand gesture, although it was still a little anxious, it still stopped and stood quietly on the spot. The child was wearing a satin shirt. He waved his hands randomly and tried his best to break free from Chen Pinggan's support. When he saw the elders in his family walking down the stairs from the second floor of the boat, he quickly rushed over and immediately burst into tears. A sturdy man in black took 3 steps at a time and instantly came to the child's side. He squatted down and asked softly, young master, what's wrong? Who bullied you? I'll stand up for you. Chen Pinggan waved at Li Huai, who was trying to sneak away. The latter shrunk his neck, and when he met Chen Pinggan's eyes, he dared not continue to be a coward. He walked to Chen Pinggan's side, lowered his head, and said in a weak voice, my little white donkey won't bite people for no reason. I'm not lying to you, Chen Pinggan. Chen Pinggan nodded and said softly, but no matter what, you have to apologize to them. Li Huai raised his head and said with an aggrieved expression, why should I? That child provoked my little white donkey, and he didn't hurt it. Why should I apologize? That ignorant child should apologize to me. Chen Pinggan was about to explain something to Li Huai. Li Baoping ran back from afar and stood next to Chen Pinggan. Lin Shuyi also stood up, but he stayed where he was as he needed to help Chen Pinggan look after the basket. A dignified and angry shout came from the group, how dare you, evil creature! How dare you hurt people? It turned out to be a middle-aged man with an official's aura. His face was gloomy, and his eyes swept across the 4 people. Where are your elders? Come out. Chen Pinggan's face was calm, and he said softly, Li Huai. Li Huai, who was half hiding behind Chen Pinggan, said timidly, I scared your child. It's my fault for not controlling my little white donkey well. I'm sorry. After apologizing to the strangers in one go, Li Huai choked with sobs. Alliance had once teased this little brat that he only knew how to be a tyrant at home, a master at home, and a grandson outside. He didn't wrong Li Huai. Chen Pinggan gently rubbed Li Huai's head, and then looked at the middle-aged man. Is there anything we can do? The middle-aged man sneered. What a big brat. What a big tone. Let your parents and elders come out and talk. A graceful woman with a distressed expression picked up the child and listened to the child's complaints. Her eyes became sharper, especially when she heard her child say that the donkey was bumping around and wanted to bite him whenever it saw him. It was very fierce, and if she hadn't run fast enough, one of her arms would have been bitten off by that beast. The woman was so angry that the corner of her mouth twitched. She said angrily, "You don't care. You've been sitting on the cold bench in the capital for so many years. Now that you're here, you're being bullied by a beast. You don't think it's embarrassing, but I'm a woman. I'm embarrassed for you." Chen Pinggan took a deep breath and looked at the middle-aged man with an uncertain expression. He said slowly, "Our elders didn't go with us. I can make all the decisions." The woman shifted her gaze and looked coldly at Chen Pinggan. She sneered, "If you can't control a four-legged beast, how good can a two-legged one be? A bunch of bastards without parents." Li Baoping was so angry that her lips were trembling. Her face was red as she said, "My little white donkey is very obedient. If it did something wrong, we'll admit it. If it didn't do anything wrong, you're not allowed to slander it. If you have the ability, you can ask that child again. Ask clearly the cause of the incident, and then spout nonsense." Lin Shuyi's expression was malicious. He raised his arm and reached into his chest. Among the stack of yellow paper talismans, there was a great disparity between the ranks. With Lin Shuyi's body and mind that had just started cultivating, he could only control the 3 lowest talismans, the beads on the plate. Chen Pinggan quickly looked at Lin Shuyi and gave him a subtle questioning look. The latter nodded and signaled with his eyes that the yin spirit was not far away. He had already contacted it and the yin spirit could appear at any time. After Chen Pinggan retracted his gaze, he said to the man seriously, "I hope that madam can apologize to us." That scholarly middle-aged man seemed to feel that it was beneath him to compete with a group of children. He more or less knew his son's temper. When the anger from before subsided, he somewhat realized what was going on. After hearing the absurd words of the youth with straw sandals, he only felt that it was funny. He only thought that it was a common youth who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. He said disapprovingly, "Since you have apologized, and you are in a situation where your elders aren't around, I won't make a fuss about it. However, to prevent that beast from hurting people, I think it's best to kill it. Otherwise, if it really hurts people, the consequences will be really difficult to deal with. It's not something that you children can bear." The woman sneered, "Respect. Don't you know the principle of death when the master is humiliated?" The man in black looked a little embarrassed. He quickly turned around and bowed to the woman. The child suddenly whispered in her ear and pointed at the young lady who was carrying the small bamboo chest. The woman nodded and said with a smile, "That's right, after killing that beast and throwing it into the river, remember to teach those 3 little fellows a little lesson and that will be enough. As for the little girl in the red cotton-padded jacket, I think she's quite pleasing to the eye. It's not bad for her to be my Yu'er's personal maid. It's also a blessing for her." Li Huai was extremely terrified. He grabbed Chen Pinggan's sleeve with all his strength. "It doesn't matter if they beat me or scold me, but the little white donkey can't die. I'll apologize to them again. I can compensate them with the book. Didn't you tell me that the book was very valuable and not to lose it?" Chen Pinggan reached out and pressed the child's head heavily, not letting Li Huai continue. "Apologize my ass. You're not wrong now." Li Huai was stunned on the spot. Chen Pinggan pressed Li Baoping's head with his other hand and said softly, "I'll try. It's hard to say whether young martial uncle can help you vent your anger. We'll only know after we try." Lin Shuyi was about to speak when Chen Pinggan gently shook his head at him. Finally, he looked at the seemingly reasonable middle-aged man and asked, "Is it because you can't reason with me and there's nothing to talk about?" The man was a little upset. He narrowed his eyes and said gloomily, Do you know who you're talking to? The man waved his sleeve and ordered the retainer in black beside him, "Kill the donkey." Chen Pinggan took a deep breath. The young man's momentum changed completely. Alliance had once taught him a method to circulate qi for 18 stops. Chen Pinggan had tried it many times. At most, he would be in unbearable pain after 7 stops. It should be known that Chen Pinggan's tolerance for pain was far beyond his peers. The only time he made it to the 7th stop was when Chen Pinggan almost rolled on the ground. Only in the first 6 stops could Chen Pinggan, who only had the physique of the second realm of martial arts, complete the 6-stop journey relatively smoothly. It was obvious that there was an extremely crucial divide between the 6th halt and the 7th halt. But for Chen Pinggan, being able to compare notes with Zhu He, who was at the peak of the 5th realm, on Chiduan Mountain, he still had the strength to fight. The two sides fought back and forth. Although Zhu He had said in advance that he would suppress his qi operation to the level of the 3rd realm, Zhu He had never really entered Jianghu, so he didn't quite understand the meaning behind it. Only the military swordsman from Martial Mountain in the small town could tell at a glance that the young man's extremely crude walking stance by the river was already filled with the intent of the fist. If you don't practice the truth, you'll be possessed for 3 years. If you practice the truth, you'll kill the god with 1 punch. Of course, Zhu He knew these 2 sentences. But because he had not reached the 6th realm and had not experienced the higher levels of martial arts, he didn't really understand the truth. Zhu He didn't even know that the limit he firmly believed in was the 9th realm. But above this, there was the legendary 10th realm. To reach the peak of the mountain, I am the peak. On the path of martial arts, after crossing the threshold by chance and talent, one would enjoy as much fortune as one could endure. It was the most fair. No matter how much the qi cultivators on the mountain looked down on the pure martial artists of the lower 9 classes, when their fists really landed on the heads of these immortals, it was really painful. The strong man in black strode forward and walked out from the side of the family head. He said casually, "I advise you to get out of the way." Chen Pinggan didn't say anything and took a step forward. The sound of the ship's boards was dull. To outsiders, the momentum was ordinary. At most, it was the young man who had some brash strength. The hands-hand manual boxing technique had a total of 6 staggered steps. After Chen Pinggan memorized the 18 stops, he tried to stop 1 step at a time. Once Chen Pinggan started to compete with him, there was really no saving him. Just like when Chen Pinggan decided to practice the boxing technique a million times just because of Miss Ning Yao's words. After that, he didn't slack off every day. As a martial artist of the 3rd realm, although the strong man in black was surprised to see a poor young man who he met by chance walk a decent boxing stance, he still didn't take any precautions. Instead, he felt a little lucky. After all, if he only bullied a few children after killing the donkey, he didn't know where to put his face. There were many people on this ship who were the retainers of the family clans. After the 6-step boxing stance, Chen Pinggan exerted force on the last step. The ship's boards creaked under his feet. His whole body was like an arrow, instantly arriving in front of the strong man in black. The stunned man could only take a deep breath in a hurry and protect his chest with his arms. A sharp pain came from his arm, as if he was hit by a hammer. His whole body was knocked back, and he could only stagger back. Just when he managed to stop himself from falling back and was about to let his almost paralyzed hands relax a little, a black shadow leaped up high like gangrene and hit the man's chest with his knee, which was slightly open in the middle. This time, the man was seriously injured, and he flew out with a bang. When the blood rushed to the man's throat, his mind was completely clear. His mind was even clearer than before when he had been careless. He was a true 3rd realm martial artist. Thinking of the young man's unexpected ruthless attack, he was most likely an arrow at the end of its flight. As long as he used this momentum to fall in the distance, he should be able to quickly get up and face the enemy. But the young man in the straw sandals was like a cool breeze. His speed did not decrease but instead increased. He had already arrived at the side of the man who had not fallen to the ground and punched down on the latter's head. Bang! The body of the strong man in black was hit straight to the ground. Because the momentum of the fall was too great, he even rebounded slightly on the ship's boards. After vomiting a large mouthful of blood, the The third realm martial artist, who had not made a single move or punch, completely fainted. Fortunately, when he saw that the man had fainted, the young man's straw sandal that was about to step on his face suddenly stopped and retracted. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. The middle-aged man did not have time to turn around. He could only maintain the posture of turning his head. His expression was that of a scholar who had fallen into a cesspool. The woman's face was white as snow. The child in her arms had his mouth wide open. The group of servants and maids had not recovered from their shock. Chen Pinggan glanced at the man in black at his feet. After confirming that there was no possibility of a sneak attack, he looked at the man in the scholarly robe. Finally, his gaze rested on the woman. He slowly opened his mouth and said, "Does reason make sense now?" The frightened woman suddenly screamed at the middle-aged man, "Ma Jingfu is a good-looking but useless good-for-nothing. You are a dignified Dali official. Do you want to be a good-for-nothing as well? Hurry up and reveal your official identity." The man turned around and pointed at the young man in the straw sandals. He shouted, "How dare you! I am the Wanping County Magistrate at the end of this embroidery river. I am currently on my way to take up my post." Chen Pinggan did not even look at the angry man. He stared fixedly at the woman. The woman said that he was born without a mother. She also said that she wanted to kidnap Li Baoping to be her family's maid. Chen Pinggan remembered it very clearly. Chen Pinggan wasn't someone who didn't hold grudges. When others hurt him unintentionally, Chen Pinggan would endure it and let it go. However, when it came to enmity that had to be avenged, as long as he didn't get his revenge, he would remember it for 96 years of his life. Alliance had once asked him with a smile, "You ate the remaining 4 years." The young man replied in a methodical manner, "Before I was 4 years old, I had parents. I was not sensible, so I did not count." Chen Pinggan rushed forward again like a breeze. He kicked the woman and the child in her arms, causing them to stagger and fall. However, compared to the black-robed man, the shock was more than the pain. Chen Pinggan coldly glanced at the child who was living in luxury. The middle-aged man cursed, "How dare you! You don't even let a woman and a child go? You bandit! You are crazy." Chen Pinggan walked towards the man and said, "As long as you are a person, you must be reasonable when you reach the age of sensibility. I don't care whether you are old or young, male or female." The man stepped back step by step. He pointed at the young man and threatened in a trembling voice, "I will punish you with a felony and let you live in prison for the rest of your life." At this moment, someone on the second floor said in a low voice, "Young man, this is a bit too much. It's enough that you have taught the retainer a lesson. You should stop now. If you continue to be unforgiving and dare to violate the law with your little ability, although I am not an official, it is not difficult for me to stop you and help the county magistrate arrest you." Chen Pinggan heard the voice and turned his head. An old man in a cyan robe was standing on the bow of the ship on the second floor. Beside him stood a man in a white robe with a sword. The man was resting with his eyes closed. Chen Pinggan withdrew his gaze and said to the man who claimed to be the county magistrate, "Apologize to us." Seeing that someone was speaking up for justice, the man was emboldened and said angrily, "Don't even think about it. When we are in the jurisdiction of Wanping County, I will let you, a bandit, know the law of Dali." Chen Pinggan took a deep breath and said, "Apologize." The man in the Confucian robe was a little timid. He looked at the second floor and shouted, "I hope you will be brave enough to do what is right. I will be grateful." The old man was expressionless. He looked at Chen Pinggan's back and said, "Young man, I advise you for the last time. Stop and stop." Chen Pinggan signaled to Lin Shuyi at the bow of the ship not to act rashly for the time being. He turned around and asked, "Senior, what were you doing just now?" The old man smiled calmly and said, "Of course, I was watching with folded arms. Of course, if the county magistrate really dared to kidnap a woman, I would definitely stop him." Chen Pinggan asked again, "What about the donkey they killed? Would you stop them?" The old man laughed involuntarily and said, "I am not a living bodhisattva. Of course, I would not stop them. It was just a donkey." Chen Pinggan continued to ask, "Then who is the unreasonable one?" The old man was stunned and hesitated for the first time. He said, "The reasonable one is probably on your side. But little guy, it doesn't mean you can do whatever you want." Chen Pinggan finally said, "Asking them to apologize means I can do whatever I want. Senior, our reasons are still not the same." The old man laughed heartily and said, "Then this old man really wants to see whether or not your reasoning can surpass this old man's reasoning." Chen Pinggan nodded with his arm hanging down. He shook his wrist quietly and pointed at the man in the white robe who had opened his eyes. "Rely on him, right?" Lin Shou understood and moved his lips slightly. The old man was already full of anger, but he still smiled as usual and nodded. "What? You don't agree?" The old man smiled and turned to look at the retainer swordsman beside him. "Bai Jing, that little guy seems to think that his fist is more reasonable than your Lingshu sword." The swordsman in the white robe twitched the corner of his mouth and sneered. At this moment, a strange scene suddenly appeared. Before the experts on the ship could figure out the significance of the words Lingshu sword, the swordsman in the white robe, who was like a sword immortal, was grabbed by the neck and flew out from the bow of the second floor. He drew a beautiful arc and finally crashed into the Xiuhua River, splashing a huge splash. After a long time, he did not emerge from the water. No one knew whether he was dead or alive. The man in the Confucian robe was scared out of his wits. He looked at the boy who had already climbed the stairs and hurriedly said, "Sorry, I was wrong. I was wrong." Chen Pinggan came to the old man's side. There was only an old man on the bow of the second floor with a twitching face. After seeing the boy's figure, the old man swallowed his saliva. Chen Pinggan asked softly, "Sir, you've lived for so long. Logically speaking, you should know much more than me. Has all your logic gone to the dogs?" The old man was about to speak when a big white fish jumped out of the Xiuhua River. It turned out that the swordsman in the white robe was thrown back to the second floor of the ship. The old man bent down and wanted to say something but stopped. The boy had gone downstairs and left. The man in the Confucian robe asked everyone in the family to stand obediently. When the boy in straw sandals passed by, everyone apologized. Chen Pinggan said to the man, "That's enough. But I know that you can't wait to kill us all in your heart." The man in the Confucian robe's knees went soft and he wanted to kneel down to the boy. Chen Pinggan ignored them. He returned to the bow and sat down. Li Baoping gave him a thumbs up. Lin Shuyi still leaned against the inner wall of the ship with a calm face. Li Huai was full of guilt and held the reins of the white donkey tightly, for fear of causing trouble to Chen Pinggan again. Chen Pinggan thought seriously and whispered, "I will practice boxing more diligently in the future. And Lin Shuyi, if possible, don't be lazy." Lin Shuyi nodded with a smile. "You don't have to remind me." Li Huai whispered, "I'm sorry, Chen Pinggan." Chen Pinggan raised his head and said with a smile, "You've already said what you should have said. If you're sorry because of the trouble you've caused, there's no need to apologize to me. As long as you're not wrong, don't apologize. It's the same with everyone. On our way to the Great Sui Kingdom in the future, just like today, we won't cause any trouble. But if trouble comes to us, don't be afraid of trouble. Can you do it, Li Huai?" Li Huai's eyes were filled with tears. He straightened his chest and said, "I can do it." Li Huai quickly smiled through his tears. "Chen Pinggan, you're really good at fighting. Why don't I call you martial uncle in the future?" Chen Pinggan glanced at him. Li Huai immediately changed his words. "We'll talk about it in the future." Chen Pinggan suddenly added, "If, and I'm saying if, you really meet an opponent that you can't beat even if you fight with your life on the line, then quickly admit your mistakes and admit defeat. It's not embarrassing. Staying alive is more important than anything else." Li Baoping crossed his arms and leaned against the small bookcase. He said angrily, "Martial uncle, this can't be done." Lin Shuyi said, "I think it can be done." Li Huai chuckled. "I'll listen to my future martial uncle." At the bottom of the embroidery river, a yin spirit swam like a fish in the water and smiled. 120. After this incident, the snobbish owner of the big ship immediately ran over, saying that he had prepared a private room on the second floor for the distinguished guests. It was okay even if they brought the donkey into the room. It was his small ship that should be honored. There were also some rich guests who came because of the reputation. They carried knives instead of swords. Obviously, they were here to curry favor. Chen Pinggan was not good at dealing with these people. Lin Shuyi helped him to reject them. After all, he was a young man who grew up in the construction supervision office. His speech and behavior were flawless. Even if he rejected them, they still left happily. The swordsman who was called White Whale by the old man was a slightly famous loose cultivator in the south of Dali. His sword was a real magic item called Lingshu. It was a divine weapon of the Taoist talisman branch. It was said that it was a wandering master who went down the mountain to cultivate his mind. After he passed away in the wilderness, it was accidentally obtained by the white-robed swordsman. With his good swordsmanship, he comprehended the true meaning of swordsmanship. Since then, he became famous. However, he did not like to be restrained, so he was not recruited by the Dali government and the border army. Instead, he liked to travel with his sword in Jianghu. It was not easy for this person to be remembered in the Jianghu of Dali, where dragons were everywhere and masters were everywhere. It was not easy to be recognized. In the end, he did not even have the chance to unsheath his sword. He was played in the palm of his hand from the beginning to the end. He was defeated in such a humiliating way. Maybe his sword heart would be covered in dust and his sword would be stained with dirt. In that case, the wealth of the young man with straw sandals and his group could be considered. Most of the people on the ship were scholars, merchants, and heroes of the Jianghu. Regardless of whether their temperament was good or bad, there weren't many fools. When Lin Shuyi saw that no one came over to exchange pleasantries, he rubbed his temples. The young man was a little upset. If it wasn't for the fact that he was able to see the green book box in Chen Pinggan's hands little by little when he was resting, with Lin Shuyi's indifferent temperament, he would have been unable to hold back his anger. Chen Pinggan couldn't bear it and said, "Don't worry, I will definitely make this book box to your satisfaction." Lin Shuyi sat cross-legged, his face full of exhaustion. For the first time, he opened his heart and said softly, "I really want to find a place with beautiful mountains and limpid waters to cultivate alone. I just want to stay in the mountain for 60 years and let the world go on for 1,000 years. However, Alliance once said that this method of cultivating one's heart is called withered burial. It is feasible, but it is exclusive to Qi refinement warriors who have reached a certain level. I have just started. If I were to do this now, I will definitely go crazy and fall into the unorthodox path without knowing it." Chen Pinggan nodded. "Then you really have to be careful." Li Huai squatted at the side with his chin in his hands and said happily, "Lin Shuyi, maybe Alliance is just scaring you. I think the Chiduan mountain is not bad. It is suitable for you to be an immortal. When you are bored, you can chat and banter with that Wei Pai, the lord of the land. You can sit on a big turtle or ride a black snake or a white python. It is so impressive. However, in this case, since you are not going to the Great Sui Kingdom with us, can you leave this book box to me? I can't carry it now. In a few years, when I am taller and stronger, I can change the small book box to a big book box. I will remember your kindness. In the future, when I return from the Great Sui Kingdom, I will return it to you." Lin Shuyi glanced at Li Huai from the corner of his eyes. He sneered and said, "I would rather stay in the Chiduan mountain to cultivate the method of longevity than leave the book box to you." Li Huai said, "Oh. Then you should continue to follow me to the Great Sui Kingdom." Lin Shuyi rubbed his glabella. He felt that only Alliance could deal with Li Huai. No, Li Baoping could do it. Chen Pinggan seemed to be able to do it too. Was he the only one who could do nothing to Li Huai? Lin Shuyi, who was in a bad mood, stared at Li Huai, making the latter's hair stand on end. He quickly expressed his loyalty and said, "What are you doing?" "Lin Shuyi, I actually want you to go to the Great Sui Kingdom with me. I am just a little covetous of your book box. I can't help it. It is bigger than mine. I don't deny that. But if you really want to get off the boat and go back to the Chiduan mountain, I will certainly not be happy. Think about it. Among the four of us, you are the most sanctimonious, but you are the most evil. In the future, If we meet a bad person who does not have the word evil engraved on his face, such as the kind who harbors evil intentions, you must be the only one who can see through it at a glance. Am I right, Chen Pinggan, Li Baoping? Li Huai looked around, looking for help. Chen Pinggan lowered his head to build the book box. He was so focused that he turned a deaf ear to him. Li Baoping was thinking about some strange questions. Her mind was wandering thousands of miles away, without any distractions. Lin Shuyi was a little heavy-hearted. Do you think our trip to the Great Sui Kingdom to study will be easy? In addition to the dangers of the mountains and rivers, there must be a lot of trouble that we can't even think of. Li Huai blinked. Lin Shuyi slowly said, our Li dynasty was founded on martial arts, and our influence in Jianghu is not to be underestimated. There are very few scholars who are expelled. Before Mr. Cliff Academy was established, it had always been scolded as a barbarian land by the entire Eastern Bottle continent. Li Huai nodded and said, I know that. Our Mr. Qi has never avoided talking about these things. It's not like he hasn't talked about the situation of Dali. Lin Shuyi sighed and said, I remember when I was young, Supervisor Song once told me something. He said that in the early years of Dali, a scholar managed to get into Lakeview Academy with his own ability. As a result, he was humiliated from all sides. It wasn't just verbal abuse. According to Supervisor Song, 2 scholars from the Great Sui Kingdom and the Lu dynasty worked together to set up a series of traps. The scholar from Dali had his state of mind shattered and became insane. Many years later, when he finally regained his sanity, he was stabbed in the back by love affairs. Then, he committed suicide by jumping into the lake. Because of this matter, our great Li was enraged by the entire nation, which was why we started a war with the Lu dynasty. Before that, the great Li had always tolerated the Lu dynasty, who used to be the great Li's upper nation, for making things difficult for them. Now, of course, the situation has changed a lot. Now, there are more and more scholars in Dali. The Qi trainers on the mountain have also started to go down the mountain to serve the Dali imperial court. They are fighting bravely at the border. Then a new pattern has emerged. That is, the literati in the Li dynasty are very noble. When scholars become officials, they will think highly of themselves. For example, the man who claimed to be the Wanping County magistrate is most likely someone who was sent to other places from the capital and has a formal background in the imperial examination. So now I'm worried that after the man gets off the boat at the border crossing of Wanping County, he will choose to reveal his true intentions to us, whether because of his scholarly spirit or because he wants to be a new official. At this point, Lin Shuyi smiled and said, fortunately, he is a civil official who used to be a scholar. But among us, there is also a mountain immortal who has never shown up. Maybe he can be deterred. After all, no matter how noble scholars are in Dali, they can't be compared with Qi trainers. But I am afraid that the county magistrate is not smart enough. Or, even if he is from the capital, he has never really seen the power of Qi trainers. Then, we will have a series of troubles. Li Huai was very worried. He turned around and slapped the white donkey lying on its side behind him. He scolded angrily, troublemaker, little white donkey, do you think you are a virgin who throws a tantrum just because someone touched you? Li Baoping suddenly said, now, that old man must be the distinguished guest of the Wanping County magistrate. They are complaining to each other. I believe that the higher the old man's status is and the better the swordsman's swordsmanship is, the more the Wanping County magistrate won't dare to do anything openly. My big brother said that a scholar can't rebel for 3 years. As for making trouble secretly, we are not afraid. As long as that guy doesn't dare to use the power of the imperial court, we can deal with whatever comes our way. Lin Shuyi, what are you afraid of? Don't be confused. Lin Shuyi thought carefully and nodded, saying, that should be the case. After Li Baoping finished speaking, she asked with a serious face, junior uncle, right? Chen Pinggan said helplessly, how would I know the tricks of these scholars and officials? Anyway, if you encounter any trouble, you can discuss it with Lin Shuyi. Last time, when the scholars' coachman entrusted the children, not only were they able to return to the town safely, but they also fooled the coachman who claimed to be a Dali spy. In fact, Lin Shuyi was the one who started it. Li Baoping set the general direction and Lin Shuyi found out the details and filled in the gaps. It was flawless. His maturity far surpassed that of his peers. Chen Pinggan suddenly stopped what he was doing. After thinking for a while, he put down the hatchet at his feet. When he was not calm, Chen Pinggan would not do anything. He would rather let it go first. AP Pap. 121. After that, Xiuhua River's 200-mile-long waterway was smooth and steady. When Chen Pinggan and the others got off the boat, Li Huai and Lin Shuyi both carried their backpacks. With Li Baoping, they became more and more worthy of the name traveling. As a result, the straw sandals teenager looked more like a young servant of a rich family. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he wouldn't have imagined that the straw sandals teenager was a martial artist who could make the secretary of a county magistrate of Dali powerless to fight back. When he got off the boat, he was carried down on a stretcher. Chen Pinggan had carefully looked at the geomancy map before going down. He didn't plan to go through Wamping County. After going south, he would have to go through a mountain range, which would probably take more than half a month. Chen Pinggan had asked the locals on the boat. There were mountain roads, but compared to the Qingsha Road of Chiduan Mountain, it was much more difficult to walk. It couldn't be used by horse carriages, and most of them were carried by donkeys. If they didn't take the mountain roads, they would have to pass through a county city. Lin Shuyi said that he hadn't figured out the method of pure yang talisman, so he couldn't let the yin spirit hide the innate yin qi. It probably couldn't enter the city openly. According to Alliance, the city god pavilion, Wanwu Temple, and a general's mansion in the county city would probably have innate rejection of the yin spirit. If there was a master in charge, it would be easy to cause problems. The group asked for directions as they moved forward. During this time, Chen Pinggan also asked the villagers and women tentatively if there were any strange legends in the mountains and whether there would be mountain ghosts. When the local people saw that the 4 children were young and were carrying bookcases, they thought that they were scholars from rich families who had gone out to play. They laughed and told Chen Pinggan about the mountains and rivers there. They didn't even have a name, and they had never heard of any strange things like that before. In the end, most of them didn't forget to recommend the Jiangshan Temple at the Xiuhua River to the 4 of them. They said that it was very effective to pray to the gods there, and that there might really be a river deity there. Every year, the county magistrate would bring people to the riverside to offer sacrifices. Firecrackers filled the sky, and it was very lively. Before the 4 of them entered the mountain, it was noon. Li Huai stood at the foot of the mountain and bowed 3 times. When he looked up and saw that Chen Pinggan did not move, he asked curiously, "Chen Pinggan, last time at Chiduan Mountain, you also bowed and said that you were bowing to the mountain god. Why are you slacking off this time?" Chen Pinggan hesitated for a moment, but still answered, "I used to go to the mountains with the old man, so I learned a little bit of the ability to observe the mountains and eat the soil." When the old man was in a good mood, he would talk about the direction of the mountains and where the mountain god would place his golden body. He was very particular about it. Generally speaking, whether a mountain has a mountain god's seat, you can look carefully before entering the mountain, and you can see a little bit of the signs. In addition, the locals said that there was no such thing here, so we can roughly be sure that the mountain road we are going to take is not the territory of the mountain god. Lin Shuyi's mind moved slightly, and he said, "Senior Yinshan said that there is a limited number of mountain gods in a dynasty. It is impossible for there to be gods everywhere. Otherwise, there will be a disaster and the fate of the place will be in a mess." In addition, the competition for mountains and rivers is similar to the competition for land and water at the foot of the mountain, which is disadvantageous to the dynasty. Therefore, generally speaking, if there is no clear record of the mountain god temple in the local county records, it is impossible for there to be a mountain god. Li Huai was a little disappointed. "Alas, I still want to have a few more painted puppets." It turned out that he had profited from the disaster at Chiduan Mountain and obtained a lifelike painted puppet for free. This made Li Huai look forward to it very much. He could not wait to get one every time he walked past a mountain. Then, when he walked to the Academy of the Great Sui Kingdom, wouldn't his small book box be full? Otherwise, The bamboo box on his back would only contain a puppet and a book. It would be too bare. Lin Shuyi laughed angrily. What face do you have to say that Chen Pinggan is a moneygrubber? Li Huai looked innocent. I didn't say that. I only said that Chen Pinggan is a gentleman who obtains wealth in a proper way. Lin Shuyi snorted coldly. Bootlicker. Li Huai was furious. If I had not begged you, would you have a small book box? Lin Shuyi, can you have some conscience? Li Baoping said angrily, shut up. When there was no one around, Chen Pinggan would practice the walking stance. Because he was carrying a big basket, he did not dare to make too much noise, so he restrained his strength and posture and tried to walk as slowly as possible. After all, when Alliance taught the 18 stops of qi circulation method at the pillow relay, he had said that slow was the essence of the 18 stops. Chen Pinggan was now stuck between the 6th and 7th stops and could not cross this hurdle no matter what. It was just right for him to practice the walking stance of the mountain shaking fist manual. After walking for about 4 hours on the mountain road, Li Huai was already panting, and so was Li Baoping. Chen Pinggan knew that this was the end of the so-called one breath, so he just picked a stream to rest next to. Lin Shuyi was indeed an immortal who had climbed the mountain with 1 foot. He was calm and composed, but his forehead was slightly sweaty, which was not as good as Chen Pinggan's. After finding a place to sit down, Chen Pinggan took out Li Baoping's saber from his big basket. It was a narrow saber that Alliance called the auspicious symbol. Although Alliance had said the word last, Chen Pinggan was not blind. He was used to using kitchen knives and hatchets, and had even borrowed Miss Ning's skirt saber for a period of time. He knew that this saber must be very expensive, so as long as there was no one around, he would take out the small beheading dragon platform that appeared out of nowhere and carefully sharpen the blade. After unsheathing the saber, he first dipped it in water on the shiny black beheading dragon platform. Chen Pinggan squatted by the stream and began to slowly sharpen the saber. His movements were slow and unhurried, as if he was treating the town's most precious and fragile porcelain. Chen Pinggan liked to concentrate on one thing, especially if he could do it well. Set a small goal first, such as 1 second to remember. Book Guesthouse mobile version. (122). Chen Pinggan's group entered the mountain from the north to the south. At about the same time, another group of people entered the mountain from the south. It was an old Taoist with a peachwood sword on his back and a string of silver bells on his waist. His Taoist robe was old and he wore straw sandals. He didn't look like an immortal at all and looked very shabby. Behind him was a limping young man with a dull expression. Other than carrying a big bag on his back, he also carried a banner that read "Subdue demons, capture ghosts, eliminate evil and defend the Tao" on his shoulder. It was probably because he had washed it too many times that the cloth had long turned white. The 8 words were also faint in ink. There was also a young girl with a round face who was 7 or 8 years old. She was small and thin. She reached out to support the old Taoist who had his eyes closed for some reason. The old Taoist suddenly raised his head and looked at the continuous green and black mountains. He said in surprise, "Eh? This mountain is not far from the Jiangshan temple of the Xiuhua River. There's actually such an obvious demonic aura that soars into the sky. There must be a secret behind this. Although there are boundaries between mountains and rivers and they don't interfere with each other, this place is strange, very strange." After the young girl with a red face heard this, she asked worriedly, "Master, what should we do then? Last time when you failed to capture a demon on Mount 3 Branches, the people who hired us were so angry that they didn't even give us money. Now we really don't have much money left. Why don't we take a detour?" The old Taoist snorted coldly. "Take a detour? If I didn't encounter it, it would be fine. That demon was lucky. Now that I've encountered it, how can I let it go? The banner says eliminate evil and defend the Tao. How can it be for outsiders to see?" The young girl sighed and reminded him, "Master, there are no outsiders here." The old Taoist smiled embarrassedly. "It's just a slip of the tongue. I haven't recovered from Mount 3 Branches yet. It's really too infuriating. Even if there's no merit, there's still hard work. They're actually not willing to give me even half a copper coin. There's actually such a shameless and heartless fellow in this world. They deserve their ancestral tombs to be invaded by mountain ghosts and their descendants to meet with misfortune. The young girl reminded him again, Master, didn't you always say that we cultivators must have a normal heart? The old Taoist, who was still kind a moment ago, was furious. He stretched out 2 fingers and pinched the round-faced young girl's arm. He twisted it fiercely and said with a stern face, Who gave you the courage to teach me a lesson? How dare you go on and on? The little girl was in so much pain that she burst into tears. She hurriedly begged for mercy. It hurts, it hurts, it hurts. Master, I don't dare anymore. The old Daoist didn't turn around. He slapped the bell on his waist heavily, causing it to ring. He laughed sinisterly and said, Little bastard, you still dare to have killing intent towards your master. The crippled youth remained silent. Soon, blood began to seep out of his nose and ears. However, the dull youth remained silent and motionless. The little girl cried even more sorrowfully. Master, please let senior brother go. He must have done it unintentionally. I promise Master that within the next 3 days, I will strive to give Master 1 more gin of spring water. The old Daoist smiled and rubbed the little girl's head forcefully. His strength was not light, and the little girl's slender body swayed from side to side. It's not a fight, it's a must. The old Daoist finally retracted his withered hand and laughed, Enter the mountain. A horse wouldn't grow fat without wild grass. Perhaps this was a windfall. Speaking of which, ever since I have you 2 little bastards by my side, even though I've been eating and drinking for free, I've been able to cultivate with peace of mind. Thinking of this, I feel that I should treat you 2 better in the future. Ha ha. The little girl supported the blind old Daoist and began to climb the mountain. The crippled youth silently wiped away the blood. He was used to it. The little girl secretly turned her head and smiled. The youth grinned, indicating that he was fine. After the 3 of them entered the mountain, they had been going around in circles for more than 10 days. They could not accurately find the source of the demonic aura. The old Daoist could always feel the subtle demonic aura permeating the surrounding mountains and trees. However, he still could not find the entrance. The old Daoist knew that the big demon's cultivation was definitely not weak. Otherwise, it would not have the ability to cast the camouflage formation that covered the sky. However, the old Daoist was still unwilling to give up. Every day, he let the crippled youth carry the banner to scout the way. He brought the round-faced little girl to rest near the mountain path. From time to time, he would take out a wooden compass, commonly known as the upside-down compass, which was commonly used by Taoist cultivators and yin-yang magicians. It was not unusual. However, the scarlet thin needles at the bottom of the heaven lake would occasionally flow with golden light, revealing the hidden mystery of the compass. The sky was gloomy and foggy. It could rain at any time. The old Daoist was squatting by the side of the road. He lowered his head and stared at the compass. He muttered, Upside down, there are mountains of gold and silver in the 24 mountains. Upside down, there are dragons' pools and tigers' caves in the 24 mountains. The old Daoist put away the compass and turned his head to the distance of the mountain path. He chuckled softly and said, The road to wealth is here. Heaven never bars one's way. It seems that when we arrive at Wanping County, we can have a few drinks. The round-faced little girl followed the old Daoist's gaze and saw a group of people walking slowly. She tried her best to open her eyes wide. As those people were getting closer, she found that the leader was a youth with straw sandals and a big basket on his back. He was holding a chopper and occasionally chopping off the branches beside the narrow mountain path to prevent the branches from piercing his clothes. There were 3 people behind him. They were all young. There was a little sister in a red cotton-padded jacket, a sneaky boy, and a young brother with a cold expression. The 3 people behind them were carrying extremely cute emerald green bookcases. Finally, there was a white donkey with a luggage bag following behind. The little girl lowered her voice and said, Master, they don't look like rich people. Alas, why don't we just give up? The blind Daoist raised his eyebrows and said, Even a mosquito's leg is meat. You are half the head of the family. Don't you know how many copper coins you have left in your pocket? Look at your senior brother's gluttonous stomach. How much money has he eaten? If it weren't for my pity, do you think you can live in this world for a few days? The sensible little girl hurriedly patted the old daoist's shoulder and said gratefully with a sincere smile, "So my brother and I have never complained that we work like cows and horses for you. But if you get angry in the future, can you teach me a lesson when my brother is not here? Then my brother won't be angry and you won't have to punish him with the sect's rules." The old daoist slowly got up and the little girl immediately stood aside with her hands behind her back. This group of people was Chen Pingan and the others who went south to Yefu Pass at the border of Dali. In fact, Chen Pingan had already seen the smiling old daoist and the reserved little girl. After Chen Pingan and the others approached, the old daoist stroked his beard and smiled. He said in a slightly awkward Dali official language, "If I'm not wrong, you have encountered a bloody disaster on this trip. Don't think that you will have good fortune after surviving a great disaster. In my opinion, you will have a real disaster next. Only when you pass this hurdle can you have good fortune after." Chen Pingan's heart sank, but he didn't show it. Li Baoping looked at the little girl whose face was slightly pale. The latter smiled shyly and Li Baoping also smiled. The little girl in the red cotton-padded jacket and the younger girl immediately liked each other. Li Huai almost blurted out, "Old daoist, aren't you blind? Why are you looking at this and that?" However, Li Huai engraved the disturbance on the embroidery river in his heart. He immediately covered his mouth and was determined not to cause trouble. The blind daoist seemed to have noticed Li Huai's thoughts and laughed. "You don't know that there are 10 great supernatural powers in Taoism. Among them, there is a saying that open the heart's eye, clear heaven and earth, ghosts and ghosts retreat. I happen to have mastered this supernatural power. I don't dare to boast that I've mastered it, but I can be considered to have a small accomplishment. I don't look at people by their appearance." Lin Shuyi looked indifferent and said, "The Confucian saints have taught that strangers who meet by chance should not talk about strange things." The old daoist was slightly surprised and soon sighed, "Forget it, Buddhism does not save people who are not destined to be saved. Taoism does not save people who are not destined to be saved. Go, I hope you'll be careful on the way. If there's really trouble, you can shout loudly. If I'm lucky enough to hear it, I'll definitely return to help. However, if the journey is far away, even if I want to, I'll be powerless." After saying these words, the blind daoist turned sideways to let them pass. Chen Pingan smiled and said, "We'll be careful. Thank you for your reminder." The two sides brushed past each other. Li Baoping waved generously at the skinny little girl with a round face. The little girl timidly raised her small hand in front of her chest and gently shook it as a silent farewell. The old daoist waited until Chen Pingan and the others disappeared on the mountain road and muttered, "Along the way, if the Dali people were vulgar martial artists or ignorant people, my method has always worked. Why didn't it work today? Bad luck, everything is not going well. It seems that this demon subduing this time can't fail. The big demon in the mountains must have a strong family background. This time." The blind daoist's eyelids trembled slightly and he stopped talking. He patted the head of the little girl who was looking at the mountain road reluctantly and said amiably, "Ju as long as this succeeds, my thunder cultivation will be guaranteed. I won't have to worry about money anymore. Then, I'll treat you and your brother better in the future." The little girl raised her head and smiled, "As long as you don't hit the bell often in the future, it'll be fine." The blind daoist did not comment. He suddenly raised his head and made a gesture with his fingers. Instead of being shocked, he looked happy. "The weather has changed. What a strong demon aura. It can actually cause the climate of the mountains and rivers to change. Good. We've finally lured the snake out of its hole. Little Ju prepare to follow me to eliminate the demon and protect the Tao." The little girl nodded vigorously. Facing the demons and ghosts that frightened the people at the foot of the mountain, she was not afraid at all. The little girl took out a small silver knife that was less than an inch long. She rolled up her sleeves and prepared to use the knife on her arm. She asked, "Master, do you want the talisman spring now?" The old daoist nodded and said, "Although I still have some, to be careful, I'll give you some first." Let me prepare for emergencies so that I won't be caught off guard by the demon. If that happens, I'll harm you and your brother." The little girl took a deep breath and used the knife to cut a wound on her arm. Blood immediately gushed out. She quickly raised her arm and said, "Master, it's done." The blind daoist skillfully stretched out a finger of his right hand and opened his left palm. He quickly used his finger to draw a talisman on his palm. Then, his fingers and palm interchanged, and a talisman was also drawn on his right palm. The little girl, whose face was getting paler, still asked seriously, "Master, is it enough?" The old daoist laughed and said, "It's enough for now. Master, let's let the big demon that occupies this mountain taste the feeling of being struck by lightning." About a mile away from the master and disciple, Chen Pingan suddenly stopped and raised his hatchet to signal the three people behind him to pay attention. In the distance, they saw a young man holding a strange banner. His body was as strong as a wild mountain monkey. He jumped out from the depths of the dense forest with his back facing Chen Pingan and the others. The young man landed on the mountain road and shook the banner several times. Then, he wanted to follow the mountain road that was good for running and meet up with the old daoist. However, when the young man turned around, he saw Chen Pingan and the others on the mountain road. The sweaty young man was a little anxious. After thinking for a while, he gritted his teeth and changed his mind. He continued to escape down the mountain and chose to take a detour. At the same time, the young man did not forget to make a gesture to Chen Pingan and the others to leave quickly. Li Huai was stunned. "What's going on?" Lin Shuyi frowned and said, "There should be evil spirits chasing after the young man. I can feel a foul aura." Sure enough, a blurry figure wrapped in billowing black smoke saw Chen Pingan and the others. It paused for a moment and emitted a thick and eerie aura. However, in the end, it still chased after the crippled young man holding the banner and left quickly. Chen Pingan said to Lin Shuyi, "Ask Senior Yin Shun what he said." After a moment, Lin Shuyi replied, "Senior Yin Shun told us to continue forward and not stay. He will take a look at the appropriate time. However, he also said that he is only escorting us to the border of Dali. He reminded us that the purpose of this trip is to travel and study, not to be good people who want to kill demons. He does not want us to take the initiative to cause trouble." Chen Pingan nodded. "Tell Senior Yin Shun to act according to the circumstances. If he can help, he will. If he can't, he won't force it. Also, Lin Shuyi, you also prepare the 3 talisman. Then you will lead the way and I will be at the back of the group. Bao Ping, Li Huai, remember, if you really encounter the legendary ghosts and spirits, don't be afraid and don't panic. Don't learn. Forget it, let's hurry." Chen Pingan originally wanted to say that they should not learn from Zhu Lu from Kedunshan Shiping. She was clearly at the peak of the second realm of martial arts, but she did not even dare to make a move when she encountered the demon White Python. However, when he thought of Alliance's casual remark, "Those who talk about others behind their backs must be inhuman," Chen Pingan swallowed his words back into his stomach. Lin Shuyi's expression was calm. The stack of talisman treasures of the small town's Li family. Among them, there were 3 yellow paper talisman of the lowest grade. Lin Shuyi could now barely control them. A pearl on a plate was a water talisman. A fire talisman called Fire Rain. The last one was the 5 Mountains barrier-breaking talisman, which belonged to the category of Mountain Spirit talisman. However, Lin Shuyi's real reliance was still not the 3 talisman of unknown power, but himself. It was the secret thunder technique recorded in that book. However, Lin Shuyi certainly would not ask for trouble and put everyone in danger just because he wanted to test the power of this hand thunder technique. The group of people walked quickly. Li Huai raised his hand as he walked and wondered, "It's raining now? Why didn't you tell us in advance?" The rain was not heavy, but it made the cold air in the mountain forest much thicker. Chen Pingan took out 4 bamboo hats from the basket on his back. All of them were purchased in Red Candle Town for this kind of hurried journey in the wind and rain. After everyone put on a bamboo hat, they did not stop walking. Chen Pingan looked back from time to time. In the distance, the blind old Taoist faced the limping youth running all the way towards him and laughed, "Come on, little evil spirit, you're courting death." Die for this poor Taoist. The old Taoist stepped forward and after drawing a talisman with his palm, he reminded the limping youth, "Get down." The youth threw himself forward and rolled on the muddy mountain road. The old Taoist's palm glowed with golden light. Every stroke of the talisman lit up with golden light, and there was a faint sound of thunder from his palm. This dazzling golden light was particularly eye-catching in the middle of the wilderness where the wind and rain were obscuring the sky. The black smoke behind the youth suddenly stopped. Just as it was about to escape, it was already hit by the golden light. It was like a big golden net covering the youth's body. With a sizzling sound, the black shadow wailed and soon disappeared. The youth bent his back and ran behind the old Taoist. Panting, he inserted the spirit-summoning banner into the ground. Seeing the worried look on the little girl's face, he grinned and shook his head, indicating that he was fine. After killing the ball of yin with one palm, the old Taoist laughed heartily. A low-level otherworldly item born of withered bones dares to show up in front of this poor Taoist. A wisp of grey seemed to be pulled into the banner. The old Taoist rose into the air and waved his palm. Come, 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 come. Turn it all into this poor Taoist's immeasurable merit. The otherworldly item behind the youth and the little girl was blown away by the old Taoist's thunder technique. Soon, another wisp of grey flew into the banner. On the mountain road, the old Taoist's body twisted and turned. His hands moved quickly and he waved his palms. Every time, golden light shone and thunder rumbled. The momentum was astonishing. The old Taoist laughed heartily. In the rainy weather, the lightning reflected on the blind old man's old face. His imposing manner was domineering, and he indeed had the ability to slay demons. This poor Taoist's thunder technique is mighty. Otherworldly items like you can't compete with it. Does that sneaky big demon behind the scenes still want to send these minions to their deaths? Quickly surrender and hand over half of your belongings. Maybe this poor Taoist will be merciful and let you go. For thousands of years, the thunder technique had always been at the top of all Taoist techniques. Once it was used, its power was acknowledged to be vast and unstoppable. However, the so-called Five Thunders technique was only understood by a few Taoist sects in the Aquarius continent. Most of the other inheritances were incomplete, or they only had the appearance but not the will of the gods. Therefore, there would be a backlash to the person who used the technique. After a long time, his vitality would be depleted and it would become the source of his lifespan. Therefore, this old Taoist's blindness might not be inborn. The rolling black smoke that was moving quickly in the forest around the mountain road gradually reduced. The disgusting sounds of whimpers, howls, and growls that were gathered together completely calmed down. The little girl said softly, "Master, there are many lanterns behind us." The blind old Taoist turned his head and looked. He sensed that white paper lanterns appeared out of thin air from the mountain road in the north. They were lit up out of thin air like a fire dragon that was thousands of feet long, slowly swimming in the wilderness. The old Taoist's expression was solemn. He rubbed his palms. The talisman that was painted with his female disciple's blood was almost used up. The old Taoist reached for the peachwood sword on his back as if he was facing a great enemy. A woman in a bright red wedding dress came slowly with an oiled paper fan in her hand. Her lips did not move but a gloomy voice sounded in the ears of the master and disciples. "This Taoist priest, you can continue to draw talismans. It's okay even if you draw all over your body. I can wait. After that, I will invite the three of you to my residence as guests. I will personally wash your faces, pull out your tendons, and drill your hearts." The red-clothed female ghost with the paper fan seemed to be most interested in the round-faced little girl. Her hoarse voice continued to sound. At the same time, she reached out her hand to cover the little girl's snow-white face. "For example, washing your face like this." The next moment, the round-faced little girl was so frightened that she quickly closed her eyes. It turned out that after the red-clothed female ghost raised her hand to cover her face, she gently wiped it down. It was as if the entire face was peeled off and washed, revealing a horrifying bloody face. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.